Hello and good evening. Tonight's gentle journey takes us to dark nights of medieval Japan serial killers. Ritual, justice, and quiet fear. Lower the volume, rest your eyes, and let the past be your lullaby. If this brings you peace, consider liking and subscribing only if it truly helps. And share in the comments where you're joining us from and the hour there. Now, lights down, a soft fan if you have one, and let's begin our walk through history. Imagine Lake Biwa at night, the water wide as a dark breath and the mountains keeping their blue silence. A small boat cuts a narrow path across the surface, lantern hooded, oars whispering. On board are 15 traveling monks and the young acolyte, their sandals stacked, their satchels heavy with offerings meant for the temples in Kyoto. They have entrusted their safety to the boatman, a local practiced at ease, calling out the names of the stars to steer by. He is known on shore as Hyo of Katada, and in this hour he is counting not constellations, but coins. The treasure the monks carry pulls at his mind the way the moon pulls at the lake. He waits until the channel narrows, where the reeds grow thick and the water takes on the sound of a breath through teeth. A second boat glides from the dark, then a third. Shapes lift from the gunwales as spears, hooks, short swords meant for work that leaves no long echoes. There is no prelude. The men in Hyo's employ swarm as swiftly as fish, boards bumping, hands seizing. A prayer begins on the monk's lips and turns to shout and a spray. One leaps and is pinned, another reaches for the rail and is cut down. Metal answers flesh with a sound like wet wood breaking, in the crush and a slither in the cold astonishment. The lake tugs at robes and drags them open like unspooled clouds. By dawn, the water closes over 16 bodies, and a new quiet spreads outward in rings. Hyo counts again, coins now, not stars, and disappears into the morning with the offerings that will never reach their altar. That is the story as the chroniclers told it, later the Lake Biwa mass killing. An outrage of the Muromachi age, and not a parable, not a play. It is a crime, recorded as a crime, that pierces the comforting veil we want to draw between refined Japan and the astray brutality of men. Remarkably, the tale goes on. Hyo felt almost nothing for the strangers whose lives he took. The event that shattered him was not dawn on the water, but the grief in his own house, his father's choice to open his belly and die seppuku so that Katada, their lakeside town, might be spared collective punishment. The son's remorse began not with other people's suffering, but with his own loss, and only then did he shave his head and pursue a monk's salvation, a late penance for an early sin. We stand on that shore with two truths pressed to our palms. First, that medieval Japan could be as pitiless off the battlefield as on it, when money and opportunity aligned. Second, that punishment and atonement were not simply private matters, but communal ones. In the world that shaped Hyo and judged him, a village had a body as surely as a man did. That body could be wounded by one man's deeds, and sometimes only blood, his or his father's, could stanch the wound. The logic is hard as a lacquer bowl. If the magistrates came, they would not come for one fisherman alone. They would come for the port that harbored him, for the families who did not betray him, for the market that breathed the same air. The father's death was a gate closed against wider ruin. Let the water widen for a moment and soften the edges. Katada sits, where Lake Biwa's long oval bends toward the Seda River, the outlet that threads south toward Kyoto. In the 15th century, those waters were roads. Pilgrims to Enryakuji on Mount Hiei lifted oars and incense on this lake. Debts and rice and prayers traveled by boat. The lake's rougher fraternity boatmen, toll takers, men who blurred the line between carrier and collector, learned to read weather and people with equal speed. Extortion on such routes did not always end in blood. Most days, a toll was a payment to pass, taken as cleanly as a ferryman's fee and forgotten by both sides. When it turned to slaughter, as it did that night, it endangered the entire web of exchange shrines, markets, inns, and the reputations that stitched them. The monk's coin did more than glint. It pooled. It promised. In a time when temple treasuries funded repairs and rites, when monks could be landlords and litigants as well as mendicants, money had a weight beyond its shine. Offerings bound community to sacred place. To rob them was to unbind. In the telling, Hio's men struck not just at 16 people, but at a rhythm night crossing, prayer, arrival, bell. When the water closed over those bodies, that bell did not ring the way it would have. There is a shape to that absence, and the tale makes us hold it. You might ask, what kind of mind does such a thing and does not feel it? The chroniclers, who prefer facts to motives, do not dwell on Hio's pulse. They show us instead a society's reflex. Authority in Kyoto, at the lakeside compounds, in the shadow of Mount Hiei, would have reached for the easiest lever, make the town pay, make the family pay, make the example large. In that world, guilt was contagious. So a father, reading the air, stepped forward and did, with his own hands, what he knew the world would do, and worse, to those he loved. His son saw the world's teeth in the blood of his own house and turned, too late, toward vows. It is tempting to soften all this into morality play, to say that the father's virtue cured the son's vice, that a single brave act knit a rent community. But the story sits heavier than that. It asks us to regard a medieval calculus that is both alien and precise. Atonement is not simply a feeling, it is an act that recalibrates relationships between town and court, shrine and donor, sinner and kin. Seppuku is not only despair, it is also communication in a language authority understands. And repentance is not only regret, it is submission to a discipline that promises to carry one's name somewhere safer than the mouth of the lake. Step a little farther along the shore, and the dark broadens into a landscape. The lake's outlet joins the Yodo River system, the watery spine threading Biwa to the capital and on to the sea. Boats slipped along these veins day and night, some carrying rice tallies and court papers, some lacquer and silk, some, like that unlucky craft, coins and blessings. The men who rowed them were practical and proud. A few, like Hio, wore two faces humble ferrymen under the sun, hungry opportunist when the wind rose. Inland piracy on rivers and lakes did not call itself piracy. It called itself tolling, guiding, escort in a rough season. The difference between escort and ambush can be a finger's width when a lantern swings. Why begin our walk through medieval killers here on water, with monks, with one man's coldness and one man's sacrifice? Because the scene carries the two strands we will follow through the long night of this history. One strand is cruelty unlicensed by war robbery turned a slaughter, thrill turned ritual. the private decision to make other bodies into means. The other strand is society's answer, sometimes clumsy, sometimes ferocious, often gathered around the idea that evil ripples outward and must be stopped not only at its source, but where its circles reach. In the weeks after the lake turned quiet again, people on the southern road would have tasted the story in their tea. The market near Katada would have lifted its eyes when soldiers passed. A scribe in the service of a temple would have sharpened his brush and written something that named the dead, or did not name them, that recorded a worthless amount next to the words lost at lake. The boy who had watched the boats would have heard that the boatman's father died for the town. He would have tried to understand why this made the square feel safer. He would have looked at the water, and the water would have given him no answer at all. Our journey is quiet by design. We will meet bandits who feigned death by the roadside, nobles who survived with nothing but a flute and nerve, boys who became heroes by killing men who cut purses, priests who tried to weigh sin, magistrates who weighed heads. We will meet killers who believed 1,000 lives could fix a single body, and communities that believed a single act, just the right one, done with both hands, might keep a whole street from suffering. What we will not do is pretend the past was simple. It was not. It is as tangled as reeds in the shallows and as clear as ice on a winter morning, depending on where you stand. For now, keep the picture, the boat, the lantern, the sudden teeth of steel, the father kneeling, the sun's shorn head shining under a temple eave. The lake heaves once and smooths. On shore, a bell somewhere else at some other hour begins to ring. Heian Kyo after sunset is not the painted world of the scrolls, but a city that exhales its caution. By day, the grid shines broad Suzaku Avenue running like a spine, orderly wards like ribs, palaces and offices aligned to geomancer's good sense. By night, the geometry loosens. Lanes fall dark between plank fences. Shutters become eyelids. The watchfires of the kibishi, those imperial police magistrates meant to keep order, are few and far apart. The government has its titles, its drums to mark the hours, its lists of edicts pinned in offices. The city has other lists, places not to walk, corners where footsteps multiply, names that never appear in diaries but travel well in whispers. Peace is a good story. Heian Kyo tells it beautifully. The night tells another. Chroniclers in the 12th century put the second story to paper, not to frighten children, but to name what everyone already knew. In the Kanjaku Monogatari, a compilation of Now and Then, the roads in and out of the capital are stages, and the players are hungry. One tale sets us on the Eastern Highway near a pass, Akazaka. They say where a naked body lies face up in the dust. Travelers slow because death, even here, still negotiates attention. A lone samurai dismounts, tests the shoulder with the tip of a scabbard, and in that breath, the corpse becomes a man. The man becomes motion, the motion a theft, the theft a murder. Hakamadare, a petty criminal recently loosed by amnesty, springs up laughing, snatches the blade meant to prod him, and drives it home. This is how I repay my enemies, he says to no one and every one, and rides off on the dead man's horse as 10. 20 acquaintances step from the scrub to join him. By evening, the naked thief commands a clot of armed men. By tomorrow, the pass has learned to keep its eyes down. There's a second traveler in the same tale. and he teaches the other lesson the kunjaku loves, the virtue of caution. He sees the same corpse, keeps to his saddle, and rides on while the crowd jeers his timidity. Later, when the murder reaches their ears, the laughter nods into a shrug that admits what pride would not let it say. Prudence is the better armor on a bad road. The compiler offers no sermon. He has given you 2 roads and 2 outcomes. Choose, if choosing is even possible. Bodies are not only weapons, sometimes they are evidence no one dares to claim. The compilers write that corpses lay often by the city's approaches, and few were surprised. People gathered, as they will, to narrate a death without wounds to explain it, mouths working like looms. Then the bodies were stripped, objects becoming untied from owners and tethering themselves to need instead. There's coldness in that, and hunger, and an older belief as well that death brings kegare, pollution, best contained at the margins. The kawara, the riverbed outside the ordered wards, becomes a place for the unclaimed dead, the moenbotoke, who have no connections to pull them back into the web of rights. Those who handle such remains are marked by their work, necessary and apart. The bright capital outsources its darkness to the edges and then pretends those edges are natural. Rashōmon, the Grand Southern Gate, sits in that liminal zone, a ceremonial throat that has lost its voice. In the 12th century, a story that later lent a mask to modern literature, a thief takes shelter in the gate's upper story at dusk and meets a different kind of hunger. An old woman, thin as a persistent idea, leans by the light of a dying sun and plucks human hair from the heads of the abandoned dead. She works carefully, extracting with a practiced twist, and the thief watches because audacity attracts audacity. When he confronts her, she does not shrink. She says she will weave the hair into wigs to sell. She says survival consecrates the indecorous. She says she must live. The thief listens, decides ethics are as portable as cloaks, and strips her of hers. The tale is as pleased with its irony as the thief is with his new clothes, and it leaves you in the draft of that gate with a bad taste and a better understanding in a city where guardians of purity fail and corpses pile up in public architecture. The line between sinner and sinned against is thinner than a hair. The palaces are not immune to the night. In one case, the court could not decently pretend not to notice. Kohara no Yoshimizu, a learned official, one of those men who know how to turn law into poetry and back again, was stopped by robbers. The account is blunt, and you're grateful for the bluntness because euphemism wobbles at such moments, stabbed dozens of times, left empty in a ditch for a purse, and a reputation stripped together. The court was scandalized because the cut ran up through the ranks toward its own seat. The city was less surprised if a scholar can be butchered like a pig between wards. Then the space between a silk sleeve and dirt is paper thin everywhere. There are stories the night keeps to comfort those who must walk through it. A nobleman with a flute meets the same bandit who tricked a passerby with death and refuses to be improved upon. Fujiwara no Yasumasa, famed for sang-froid as much as sword play, meets Hakamadare on a moonlit road and does not draw steel. He plays. The melody is steady, sure, unembarrassed by danger. The thief, unused to being treated like weather rather than catastrophe, is undone by composure. In some tellings, he slinks away chastened. In others, he receives a garment, a mantle of mercy from the man he had meant to rob. Malice recedes before a performance of calm. Later gossip, always needing a finer stitch, suggests the two men were brothers. It hardly matters. The tale serves the appetite. The court prefers that refinement can conquer rawness, that melody can halt a blade. Perhaps once it even did. Yet even the court's comforting a story concedes that such grace is rare. The Heian bureaucracy built the kibishi to marry police and magistracy under one hat, investigate, arrest, judge. But as the city swelled and the century lengthened, the night outran the law. The kibishi's torches marked not control but islands. The ocean between them belonged to those who moved faster, more quietly, with less paperwork. Diaries from men of letters spend their ink on romance and verse by lamplight, while letting the edges of their pages fray with rumors: a body at 9th Ward, a shout near the palace ditch, a family that now waters the threshold, as if washing away bad luck can drown a memory. The polite language adopted for bad things an incident. A misfortune is a clerical talent. The streets have their own lexicon. It is worth pausing inside the city itself. Heian was designed to be a diagram of cosmic order. The emperor sat where the North Star should. Avenues ran true, wards watched wards. When the sun went down, that order bent under the weight of practical life, servants slipping out on errands. Love letters borne by boys whose mothers believed they had long been asleep. Porters carrying rice under the moon because rice waits for no schedule. The city at night is not monstrous. It is busy. Into that busyness thread the men who decide to make their appetite someone else's problem. Hakamadare is only a name because someone wrote it. There were others who were only habits, the slash in cloth where a purse had been. The repeated story of a man by a pass who may or may not be dead. The tales are not police blotters. They are instruction disguised as entertainment. Do not dismount for drama. Carry your daylight prudence into dusk. Understand that poverty will do what it has to, and so will fear. That old woman at Rashōmon is repellent and persuasive at once. She has hungered next to bodies all afternoon and found the boundary that will not hold. The thief who robs her claims the same logic. The compiler does not declare a winner. He lets the two wrongs chafe together in your mind until you understand that the city is not a stage for binary morals, but a maze where virtue takes the long way home. Religion does not sleep through this. Buddhism teaches that taking life is a stain that clings across lifetimes. Shinto notices that death leaves a residue that must be cleansed before doors can be opened without consequence. The Heian capital responds with rites. Priests chant for the Munbotoke, the unclaimed dead. Officials order temporary purifications after festivals that bring crowds and their mess to sacred space. Families place bowls of water at thresholds for returning spirits and for the living too, to calm their own nerves with a gesture that smells faintly of soap. None of it stops a knife at a pass. All of it keeps the living from dissolving into fatalism. The belief that the dead can be brought at least into the vocabulary of care, if not comforted, then named saves more than the dead. One more scene to hold before the night turns toward other kinds of violence. A music student, there are many in this city, of cultivated ambitions walks home after practice. He keeps his flute unwrapped so the cool air can dry the lacquer. He chooses the broadest streets he can without doubling his distance and counts the kebishi torches the way a child counts stairs. At an alley mouth, he sees the shape of a man slumped like a sack and walks on because his teacher has marked the konjaku tales on his syllabus as if they were part of his training. At a second alley, a shadow unfastens itself and falls in beside him. The student breathes in to call for help and breathes out a note instead, just one, clean and perfectly pitched. The shadow laughs, not unkindly, and drops away. Sometimes you do not need a nobleman's name for the flute to do what the story once promised it could. When dawn returns to the grid, the capital is once again dazzling. Officials in layered silks angle their sleeves just so. Courtyards fill with the polite clatter of poems being weighed. The drums at the palace call the hours like a hand tapping the table to keep friends from talking over one another. Somewhere south, Rashōmon sags a little farther. A woman plats what hair she has managed to gather. A bandit tells a story about the fool who dismounted yesterday and the wise man who did not. The kebishi file reports and send men to look into incidents they will not solve. Heian smiles in the sunlight as if it has nothing to hide. It does not lie. It simply neglects to mention what the night knows by heart. Daylight makes the capital look manageable. Dusk reminds it how easily a road can turn private. As the 12th century slides toward its close, the stories that once lived in the margins, bandits at passes, bodies by ditch banks, a flute refusing a fight begin to meet different actors. Young men who will one day wear history's names are still boys, walking the same roads as thieves. Before banners and battlefields assign them to epics, they cut their teeth on crimes that diaries barely have the appetite to record. One such boy goes by the name Ushi Wakamaru. Later, the courtly chronicles will call him Minamoto no Yoshitsune and hang poems and tragedies from his shoulders. For now, he is 15. Slight, almost pretty, practiced in the quickness of a blade and the quicker choice not to be, where a blow is about to land. On a moon-lean road, he meets Kumasaka Chohan, a robber chief whose fame has swollen to the size of a local season. You plan around him as you plan around rain. The tale has many masks recited on no stages, painted with crisp lines in later prints, but at its core, the scene is simple: a boy against a brigand whose hands know how to take. The boy wins. The victory is not merely sword against sword, but future against habit. The road learns a new name, and for a while, travelers breathe easier on that stretch. Other men, older, perform justice without speeches. Kajiwara Kagetoki. He will later be remembered for politics sharper than any blade hunts a thief whose appetite has bled an entire district. The setting is unromantic: a temple, a cup of sake, a face studied across the rim. The thief drinks. The warrior smiles as if at a joke that is not cruel but is, and the night is decided before it knows it is a stage. In the morning, ahead is proof. Official notices approve belatedly. The message is as pragmatic as it is brutal in a world where police can be far and roads overlong. A single decisive hand can stand in for a state. It is in that mood, fatigued by nightly improvisations, that the country accepts a new arrangement. In 1185, Minamoto no Yoritomo draws power to a seat far from Kyoto's palaces. His government calls itself simple bakufu, a tent administration, a headquarters under canvas, and promises something, the capital has not provided the habit of order. A system of shugo, military governors, is appointed to each province to eat the old problem of banditry for breakfast. Edicts travel with a courier's urgency. Lists of penalties are written with inks that do not smudge. The kibishi's torches still burn, but now there are other lights, campfires in garrisons, candles over desks where deputies copy names from complaints into ledgers meant to matter. The new regime inherits the old vocabulary and adds a sharper term, akutō, evil bands, violent outlaws. It is a catch-all, which is to say it is useful. Under it gather peasant mobs furious at taxes that have turned granaries into echoes, dispossessed gentry who find a spear more honest than a lawsuit, ancien retainers who, cut from payrolls, decide to write their own contracts at sword point. The petitions that reach Kyoto and Kamakura alike have a repetitive poetry: warehouses burned, stewards killed, storehouses opened like fruit by hands that did not plant. A governor replies with promises and, when he can, with men. But distance is a stubborn adversary, so are kinship and profit. In one district, the appointed shugo rides hard and hangs faster, and for a season the roads learn to keep their manners. In another, the deputy agrees quietly to split the takings, and an entire valley discovers that law can be something to be paid as well as obeyed. A letter from a manor in Yamato, mid-13th century, reads like a diagnosis. A former steward has raised hundreds, set fire to the rice barns, struck down the men loyal to the new order, and dug ditches where riders will break ankles. Troops are sent as spears, lacquered hats, a banner or two to stiffen the spines, and thrown back twice. The third time, the Lord himself rides, perhaps because shame is heavier than armor. He takes the steward's head and nails it where everyone can see it rot. The manor repopulates its silence. In the ledger of causes, the scribe is honest grievance and greed. In the margin, in a smaller hand, someone has written again. Law learns to speak in severities. Beheading is the ordinary end of the extraordinary offender. In cases that wish to be remembered as warnings, crosses are raised at crossroads and bodies tied to them for the weather to finish, or entire households are declared guilty to get their wives, sons, servants made into a single offense. Along prison gates and busy bridges, heads sprout like grim flowers on poles, nameless more often than not, a display as much about calming the obedient as frightening the disobedient. On some roads, the dead seem to have replaced mile markers. Travelers avert their eyes and count anyway. Yet violence does not wear one uniform. Between incense, smoke, and ink, monasteries themselves sometimes become strongholds, their lay followers answering to abbot more promptly than to shugo, their storehouses full enough to tempt a hungry army, their bells tolling alarm as well as prayer. A clash over a tax becomes an exchange of arrows. A procession turns into a barricade after one push too many. Who is outlaw here, someone asks, not aloud. The answer, as usual, depends on whose paper is being cited. Azuma Kagami, the chronicle that watches Kamakura's years, with a courtier's diction and a clerk's habits notes. Bandits captured and executed with the same dry hand it uses for eclipses and promotions. Names are rare, numbers appear instead, as if the mind can be persuaded by arithmetic, what the heart does not wish to dwell on. One entry reports the arrest of men who had waylaid travelers near a river ford. Another records their heads displayed at the bridge 2 days later for the discouragement of others. The discouragement is temporary. The ford remains a ford. Hunger remains hunger. Men who believe themselves unlucky find ways to make someone else's luck worse. In all this, the idea of a serial killer in the modern sense, one person killing again and again for an interior compulsion, does not exist as a category. The chronicler's lenses are tuned to motives they recognize and wish to denounce: profit, vengeance, rebellion, opportunism. But if you read against the grain, you begin to see shapes: a retainer in one province who ambushes lone travelers 6 times in a season for their purses and is handed over by his lord when the lord judges that loyalty is now more expensive than justice. A gang whose leader insists on knives rather than threats because fear without blood does not taste like victory to him. The manuscripts name them sparingly and move on. Another raid, another edict. Life in the countryside continues between these entries, like water between stepping stones. Punishment is both retribution and theater. A head on a gate is proof that the world still remembers how to draw a line. A crucified body at a crossroads tells the road itself to mind its manners. Even exile, when it is offered instead of death, has a ritual to it: the shaved head. The list of prohibitions, the distant island with its own small economy of sins. In a society where ritual purity still frames daily acts: washing hands at a threshold, spitting to one side after passing a place of death, these public purifications have their logic. Blood shed lawfully is meant to scrub away bloodshed without license. Whether it works or only stains the boards differently is a question the petitions never ask. And yet, beneath the banners and penalties, the old improvisations persist. A traveler chooses a longer road because it passes a shrine where the keeper lends charms to people who return them. A village watches over its own path with a roster: 3 men before dawn, 3 men after dusk, because they have seen what happens when the first stranger with a spear is also the only stranger with a plan. A mother stitches a coin into her child's sleeve, not as a talisman, but as a bribe to turn a blow aside if a blow must come. A priest who has buried more than his share of unclaimed dead begins to say the Nenbutsu with an extra breath, for those whose names were never written, and for those who will never be written into the accounts of their killers. Sometimes justice arrives with an accent. A shogunal envoy, sent from far away, reads 3 proclamations in a voice that does not belong to the valley, and waits in the square until the murmurs coalesce into either assent or scorn. If assent, he appoints someone you would not have chosen to keep order. If scorn, he orders the nearest storehouse opened and the rice given out, and for a week he is loved. His men catch 2 bandits and hang them properly, and for a month the road is quiet. Then he leaves, and everyone remembers how many corners there are between the square and the fields, and which ones a scream can turn into a cul-de-sac. Even heroes, once minted by legends, are not immune to this blur. Yoshitsune, who beat a robber as a boy, will later be accused of treachery by men who fear the brightness of his victories. Kajiwara, who once poured a thief into a cup and drank him, will practice a politics that leaves stains on paper that no court poet can wash out. The same hands that once steadied a province might later shake a dynasty. The tales do not forget. They are telling a story about order's fragile throne. By the end of the 13th century, if you stand on a hill and look down, you can see the intention of the Kamakura order, a net flung over provinces, each knot a deputy, each line a chain of command, and the fish slipping through as if nets were only a kind of water. The capital still writes its poetry. The shogunate still posts its warnings. Out on the small roads, men still decide at twilight whether to be generous or hungry. Heads still darken at gates and pull the eyes of children who are told not to look. Mothers still tell the story of the flute on the road and mean by it, be calm. Sometimes calm is the blade you need. We do not yet have a word for the man who kills and kills again, because killing is the rhythm his heart prefers. What we have are akutō and petitions, and the knowledge, which no proclamation can forbid, that danger in these years is both political and personal. Both an army you can hear marching from miles away, and a single figure at a bend who will hold up a hand and ask for everything you are carrying. And if he is the wrong kind of man, and the hour is the wrong kind of hour, ask for more. The years ahead will give new names to old fears. For now, the roads keep their counsel, and the bridges know more than they tell. Paper is the way power breathes in a far province. First comes the petition, stiff with honorifics, its ink thin where the brush was lifted to keep from shaking. It reports what everyone already knows: storehouses opened in the night by men who carry torches like arguments. Retainers cut down in a courtyard that yesterday held chickens. The banner of the new steward trampled by hands loyal to the old. In the margin, a thumbprint blurs a date. The document travels, tied with twine, to the nearest office with a seal. By the time it reaches Kamakura, it has been read aloud in kitchens and at forts, its details edited by rumor and need. The reply comes back faster than rice grows a parchment hungry with penalties. A deputation of men who wear their authority on their brows, and an instruction repeated as if repetition could make it law. Akutō will be put down. Akutō. The syllables are simple enough that a child can say them. The meaning is wide enough to shelter anything that frightens a clerk. Evil bands, violent outlaws, the name fits the dispossessed steward with a grievance, and the rough cousins he gathers. It fits the masterless spearman who discovered that theft is easier to coordinate than harvest. It fits the village boys who mistake rage for justice and find themselves 3 burning sheds later, outside a boundary they didn't know existed. The word gives the shugo license to act without asking too many questions. It gives petitioners a phrase to wrap around fear that would otherwise live nameless under the bed. Sometimes the putting down takes the shape the law imagines a troop riding hard, ash on their faces, spears forward, shouting the proclamations they have memorized because breath is short. A skirmish decided by weight of numbers. A head hung up where travelers cannot avoid looking. The Toyokuni estate in Yamato learns this choreography when a dismissed steward returns with hundreds at his back and an appetite for correction. 3 times the local authority moves against him, twice they are badly repulsed, and people in the next province tell a story with a caution that tastes like pride. The 3rd time brings a man whose name is known farther away. And suddenly, the rebellion becomes an anecdote in a report, heads taken, fires extinguished, the old order restored, crops continue, children learn to sleep again. But the ditch lines cut across the paddies don't fill quickly, and no proclamation fills the hole where someone you liked used to sit. Elsewhere, the lines are not so clean. Temples, with their granaries and their congregations, are both sanctuaries and strongholds. A tax dispute becomes an exchange of arrows when the abbot refuses to lower a gate and the steward refuses to turn his horse. Pilgrims unlucky enough to arrive on the wrong day will later tell two different stories, one about lay brothers kneeling in front of icons while spears thud into pillars, and one about monks in armor shouting sutras louder than orders. In a land where authority can be written in three scripts: courtly, warrior, sacred, the same act is treason, policing, or piety depending on whose seal survives the season. Every few months, a magistrate's notebook receives a case that does not fit under bandit, or rather does not sit comfortably there. A retainer in Hitachi, valued until now for the steadiness of his sword hand, has been waylaying travelers on lonely stretches of road 6 deaths in as many turnings of the moon stripping purses, vanishing before the alarm can gather. It is not a band of men, not a feud, not a riot, just one appetite, returning to the same table. The Lord, whose prestige can carry many weights but not this one, delivers the man to the authorities and calls it loyalty to the realm. For a moment, the word akutō contracts until it fits in a single skull. There are other oddities the chronicles cannot resist setting down. In Iga, a lady properly dressed, politely addressed, is revealed as the quiet hinge of a circle of thieves who have made the post road yield coin for months. The scandal is not only that a woman leads, but that a respectable house can be a trap edged with silk. When she is seized, the record is as bare as the law prefers arrest. Confession, sentence. The silence at the end of the lines invites the city to embroider. Children are warned about smiling strangers. Men repeat the tale with uneasy relish. Women count their keys. Punishment walks on 2 legs, retribution and theater. For most, the end is beheading swift, official, a line cut through a line, in cases meant to be remembered for more than a week. There's crucifixion at a crossroads, body raised where roads meet and gossip travels fastest, or a display of heads at bridges where people must look, must count, must measure the distance between a life lived and a life ended. Travelers haggle with themselves about how close to pass. Parents put hands on faces and then, after a pace or two, lower them. Some punishments are reserved for words like treason, or for crimes so repeated that even the clerks grow tired writing them down, sawing between boards, a spectacle spoken of in the same tone people use for storms that hurled oxen into the sky. But even without extremity, the message is not subtle. The estate promises wrong will be met with a precision you cannot buy and a publicness you cannot avoid. The effect is uneven. Heads blacken on posts. Markets set up their stalls a few paces farther on. A notice warns that aiding akutō will bring the same punishment as belonging to them. A cousin carries a bundle to a hiding place anyway, because blood was not invented by bureaucrats. The shugo in one province hunts hard, hangs faster, and keeps his hands clean. The shugo in the next looks the other way when his younger brother's name shows up on a petition and calls it jurisdiction. The road learns to tell which banners mean business and which mean bargaining. Records keep to their own politeness, but memories do not. There is a story that circulates about a man whose crimes were so many that even he lost count. At his judgment, he asks for a monk, and when the monk comes, he is told by word or by silence that the souls of the people he killed are clinging to him like children who will not be left. Whether or not the scene was ever staged anywhere but in a storyteller's mouth, it rings true to listeners who have buried too many without proper rites. The same evening, a bandit's sister brings rice to the temple and pays for a sutra to be chanted without the dead man's name. She calls it insurance. Buddhism runs like a small, clean stream under the day's thick water, a prayer for those cut down, a refuge for hands stained past washing, a hope that repentance weighs something on a scales too fine for the sheriff's arm. Names that history will soon borrow for larger tragedies start here with smaller ones. Yoshitsune, who once met a robber by moonlight as a boy, now walks among officers and suspicion. Kajiwara, who once served sake to a thief and to justice in the same shallow cup, will pour more potent drafts at court. It is not that crime makes heroes, it is that roads make men before battle does, and the habits learned at a gate at dusk watch the shadows. Choose your words, do not mistake quiet for safety, do not vanish when the horizon fills with banners. In the gaps between one war and the next, people practice survival without applause. Sometimes the law's hand is surprisingly gentle, which is to say, interested in outcomes rather than pains. A village that has long been generous to passing messengers receives a warning instead of a raid when two boys color outside the lines of a tax collector's patience. A steward known to run hot is told to leave the province for a year, shave his head, copy a sutra, and return with a more useful temper. Elsewhere, there's nothing between being ignored and being broken like a twig. The difference is not written in a code, it is written in who owes whom a favor and whether envy is awake. Shinto talks about kegure pollution that clings to people and places after blood is spilled or boundaries broken. You see that logic expressed without lectures in the way neighborhoods mourn and mend after an akutō incident. A roadside shrine acquires fresh rope and paper streamers. A well is covered for a month and then reopened with rice scattered on the water. A bridge rail gets scrubbed harshly with salt. No one thinks these rituals are laws. They are instead acknowledgments that something in the air needs to be folded back into shape. Head posts will do their public work. The rest is left to hands and habits. And there are arrests that are less about the act than the message. The townhouse with curtains perpetually drawn, everyone knows the address receives its plain visitors at dawn. No shouting, no spectacle in the wastere. The men who leave an hour later carry no bundles. They have taken only a ledger, which will be more consequential than a sack of coins. The clerk at the prefecture will not write informers in the book. He will record that disturbances are thereby lessened, but in the market, the sentences will be more honest. Mothers will whisper to daughters which men to avoid. Cousins will remember which smiles were expensive. A boy on an errand will be slapped lightly and told, "Don't lean on that wall if you are looking for the modern shape a single mind circling the same dark well, returning again and again, because returning is who he is. You can glimpse it briefly in the spaces the umbrous records do not fill. The retainer who hunted lone travelers until his lord refused to cover the smell, the noblewoman who played the part expected of her in one room and wrote routes and signals in another, the temple strongman who kept his neighborhood safe until the day his protection ate more coin than theft. They do not call them serial killers, they call them akutō, until they are caught and something worse afterward, and then the pages turn. By now, the Kamakura order has coffee rings on its ledgers. It has hanged men who deserved it and some who did not. It has cleaned roads so that grandmothers can walk to market and then stood away from other roads because the price was too high. It has learned the performance of justice and the compromise of peace. Out beyond the reach of any seal, children stomp puddles, testing their depth. A musician plays a flute at twilight to make his own courage behave. A woman folds a coin into a sleeve before a journey. The state is a network of ropes. Life continues like water. Finding the spaces between strands, civil peace comes apart. The way a woven mat frays first at the edges you step over, then in the middle where you sit. The shogunate's handwriting weakens. Orders go out and don't come back. The neat geometry of command that Kamakura sketched across the provinces smudges into 2 courts, then 3 lords to a valley, then no lord at all worth the name. Nanbokucho, the era of North and South, gives everyone a banner to point to and very few roofs to sleep under. Ronin men unthreaded from their lords multiply like a drought's excuses. Some hire themselves to whoever pays in coin and rice. Some discover the road is employer enough. Akutō, which once meant a knot of men who could be cut and counted, now swells to cover whole districts where law has the life expectancy of a candle in wind. The difference on the ground is not abstract. A steward might wake to a dawn without orders, and by sunset command, 50 men and 3 borrowed drums. A temple that yesterday fed farmers, at a festival today, feeds spearmen and calls it protection. Monasteries fatten on grain even as they thin on vows. Warrior monks tighten the gate and learn to aim from the cloister walk. When taxes are argued at spear point, a victor's receipt is a kind of truth. Akutō becomes a shapeshifter. One week rebels, who cite the emperor. The next week hired swords, who cite a lord's seal. And between both, familiar faces from the market door, who now carry torches. The petitions keep going to whoever is supposed to hear them. Replies grow rarer, shorter, angrier. Put down, they still say. Fewer men arrive to do the putting. Out on the water, the same arithmetic holds. The inland sea and the long lakes are roads without ruts, and road keepers without enemies are poor. Pirates kaizoku in the reaches of Shikoku and the inland sea. Koku on Lake Biwa perfect the art of toll taking. They fly colors that look almost like permission and keep books that would pass an audit if any official wished to meet them halfway. Most days, they are practical men. A live merchant pays again. A dead one doesn't. But custom fails under the weight of opportunity, and one man's restraint does not bind his friend. Lake Biwa still remembers the morning when restraint failed completely. Pilgrims, monks, and a boy acolyte took a boat toward Kyoto, cradling offerings that would have bought a village a season of hungerless nights. The boatman had a name already spoken there, with respect, the water's way of saying neighbor. At a narrow stretch where the lake funnels wind and rumor, Confederates stood up from reeds with blades in their hands, and prayer turned to a splashing and the short sounds people make when a story ends too quickly. By dawn, the deck was washed clean and the money gone, but nothing else could be set right with water. What happened next is the kind of thing chroniclers record because it refuses to be simple. Monasteries have long arms and righteous anger. Demands go out for retribution loud enough to make even provincial offices sit up. The town that harbored the pirate is told that the law will not visit merely his door. Justice, in this moment, thinks in terms of communities, and then, before the troops can demonstrate what that arithmetic looks like in practice, the pirate's father steps forward and writes a different sum with his life. By killing himself publicly seppuku, as both apology and proof, he offers the town a body to stand in for the others the troops would take. The outrage fades a half shade. A settlement is reached whose terms the lake keeps better than paper could. The son shaves his head, perhaps for faith, perhaps for hiding. People will argue later which mattered more. The monks compose sutras for the dead. The town opens its shutters inch by inch. It is an ugly mercy and a common one in these years. Guilt, like tax, can be collected from the nearest payer. Villages know this, and they practice the only politics that keeps door frames standing, make problems smaller before they reach the men who resolve by doubling. A cousin is hustled over a pass by night. A boy who has been too curious about tolls is made to choose between two uncles and goes to sea. A lord who cannot hand over the man he should hand over the man he can, and writes a letter to a shrine about the rest. Collective atonement is not fairness, it is weather. Everyone carries an umbrella. Meanwhile, on the coastlines and river mouths, a different pirate story grows into muscle. The Murakami and their neighbors turn extortion into administration. They take tolls from the inland sea the way city gates take them from wagons, and enforce with the spectacular competence the safety of those who pay. If a ship balks on Tuesday, it is empty by Thursday, and its men reconsider their theology. These are not serial killers in the way a modern mind would recognize. They are serial opportunists repeating the same calculus until interrupted by a greater one. And yet those interruptions can be redder than the toll's crews who resist are sometimes butchered as examples. Villages that feed opposing fleets find their nets cut and their boats alight. Power writes law and footnotes it with smoke. In the hills to the north, the stories darken in a different direction, the way gossip does when it travels by snowfall and firelight. Cannibal bandits, people say men who don't just rob, but roast. The Matagi hunters of the mountains become villains in a valley's mouth. The older fear of the Emishi, turned into legend by distance, is sewn into newer cloth. It is not necessary for such tales to be true for them to be useful. They keep children indoors at dusk and teach travelers to move in pairs. They also give a shape to dread that does not fit into any writ from any court. Assassination flowers in the cracks left by absent armies. Lords with careful faces hire a small, careful men. The language for them is coy courier, messenger, scout. Their work is not. A rival, a steward, sleeps on a night when wind covers footsteps sound. A troublesome militia captain finds his rice salted with something he cannot taste. Shinobi is a verb before it is a noun to endure, to slip, and the men who practice it are less demons than accountants, adding the same act across different columns until the totals please a patron. If there is serial killing here, it is not confessed as appetite, it is written as policy and filed as success. The line between a sanctioned and a stray is thin enough to cut a finger. Suzuki Magoichi, admired as commander among the Saika gunners by some, denounced as butcher by others, stands at that edge and looks down without vertigo. Executions of prisoners become lessons. Villages that resist become warnings. A style of violence presented as a strategy becomes a habit that does not flinch easily when the banner comes down. In quieter pockets, a different species of killer appears, the freelance swordsman, who has forgotten the grammar of orders and thus speaks only the dialect of blood. He is not many, but he is sufficient to make farmers bar their doors, and men in towns walk the long way home. Villages learn what towns have forgotten. Negotiation is a weapon. They keep 2 as storehouses, one for harvest, one for a tithe to fear. They set out rice in bowls for men they will swear they have never seen. They hide spears in rafters and train the boys to run messages on goat paths that do not appear on any map. When a band arrives, someone greets them with the right title. Someone else remembers a name from a cousin's wedding. And the old woman sits exactly where a first arrow would pass if things go wrong. Sometimes the ritual works, a meal is eaten, a promise made, a goat taken as tax and as thanks. Sometimes the ritual fails, and the field that fed you last year is ashes. There is no ledger for those odds, but people keep trying anyway. Religion passes through these scenes without losing its voice. Priests ring bells a fraction longer in the evening. Sutras are chanted not just for the dead, but for those who kill and those deciding whether to. At crossroads, shrines, cut paper streamers whisper in any wind that finds them. A murderer might come one night when the drums are loud in his head, lay a short blade and a handful of coin on a temple step, and vanish into trees. The abbot will not ask a face for a name. He will assign 3 junior monks to dig in the cemetery tomorrow and call the hole whatever it needs to be called. Punishments during this unraveling are as theatrical as they were in the cleaner days before, and perhaps more so. Heads still appear on gates. Crucifixions make a spring crows fat, but there are also absences used as penalties. A man's house becomes air in the night. His name is not spoken at the shrine on festival days. His daughter's wedding is briskly moved to a date with no auspicious syllables. Shame runs parallel to pain. For some men, it bites more deeply. We are tempted, reading the spare lines the chroniclers left us, to search for the inner weather of the worst offenders, some compulsion that repeats because it is the only clock left running in a ruined house. The records are stingy with that kind of detail. They prefer motive you can put on a receipt greed, revenge, policy, yet between the entries between killed for tolls, killed for hire, killed for fear you can feel. Sometimes a person who keeps choosing the same door for reasons that no lord would sign and no monk could scrub clean. Those are the killings the neighborhood remembers in a different key. They are the ones that mothers fit into their cautionary tales, the ones boys test their courage against by walking past the alley at dusk. By the time the Ashikaga court sits fully in Kyoto and calls it order again, the habits of the last decades have hardened into bone. Pirates with ledgers have carved themselves into local law. Assassins have written themselves into family trees. Villages have kept their own small archives of who can be trusted with a lantern in a storm. Some abuses stop when paid to, some only when met with a heavier fist. And in the quiet between alarms, life insists, nets are mended, rice is transplanted, children run by the headposts and find ways not to look. The road goes on because it must, past toll booths that pretend to be shrines and shrines that must pretend not to be toll booths. Somewhere on that road, a man who has split a boatload of pilgrims from their breath is repeating a prayer with shaved head and an ache that neither hunger nor piety can fully make sense of. Somewhere else, a monk is writing the names of the drowned with careful brush, not because paper repairs the world, but because forgetting tears it. Between them lies a lake that remembers. It reflects the sky with an innocence neither shore can quite afford. Kyoto burns without fire first. The Onen quarrel begins with parchment succession. Slight, a scribe's line at the wrong angle and ends by teaching the capital how to live with ash. 1467 is a year you can feel with your fingertips if you run them along a temple beam. The scars in the wood still remember how heat speaks. When houses become fortresses and gardens become trenches, the city's map redraws itself according to which alley a bow can command. A war that starts as a court's embarrassment metastasizes into a century that refuses to end on time. The shogun's voice grows hoarse. The daimyo learn to conjugate the verb to burn. Out in the provinces, the calendar forgets to turn its pages. Fields that should have been planted grow thistles shoulder high. Footpaths that used to be safe now offer choices between one danger and another. Peasants learn to listen to the ground the way hunters listen to water. Samurai, who had tethered their pride to banners, wake to find the pole broken and the cloth gone. Ronin multiply. Some are courteous wolves who will trade protection for rice. Some are wolves who have forgotten that a bargain is not the same thing as hunger. Villages feed both because a roof cannot choose the weather it must repel. In such an air, violence that used to be explained by law acquires a private grammar. The old word tsujigiri, a crossroads killing, does not arrive all at once as a new sin. It drifts in like fog from older practices. A man tests a new blade on hemp, on bamboo, on bundles of straw. A condemned criminal is tied to a stake, and the executioner's cut is judged for neatness. Somewhere between the straw and the stake, a short path opens to the unsuspecting passerby. At dusk, when the road is more rumor than distance, a figure waits where two tracks cross. The first victim is a shadow, the second is a story, the third is a habit. Crossroads are more than stones and dust. They are where roads argue and silence watches. In the late 15th century, people begin to walk them differently, shoulders squared, gaze lowered, hands near the hilt or the basket's handle. Women tuck pins deeper into their hair. Men shorten their stride only a little, because fear that looks like fear is a magnet. Tails gather like crows on the shrine roofs. A retainer, sick and convinced that 1,000 deaths could buy him back his breath. A young blade who believes the sword is thirsty and must be taught to drink. A lord's favorite who mistakes the practice yard for the world and carries that error into the dark. The kabukimono appear as if the city had exhaled its anxiety into them, and they took shape out of the esteem, outrageous sleeves, sashes knotted like declarations, hair dressed to court attention rather than modesty. They swagger because swagger repels panic. Their swords are long and their patience short. Some are merely loud, some are dangerous in the way a child is dangerous with fire. They duel without permits, they drink without counting cups, they test insults with steel. In a lane behind a tea house one night, a laugh too sharp becomes a cut too deep. In a morning market, a cart's wheel knocks a shin and the day becomes a memorial day. Townsfolk learn to step left a heartbeat earlier and to keep their compliments sheathed. Not every killing at night is a test. Not every test is a killing, but enough of both happen to make the roads tell on themselves. Parents whisper instruction to children that turns into prayer before it reaches the end. Do not stop where four ways meet. If you must, stop with other people. If you must be alone where the moon can see you. Lanterns grow more numerous and smaller because one large flame is easier to snuff. Patrols try to thread their routes through the places people fear, but the city is larger than its watchmen and more cunning than their shoes. Chronicles stingy with adjectives, generous with blood record outbreaks that look like a pattern to frightened eyes. A retainer in Hitachi belayed 6 travelers in separate months. One line reads, and we do not learn his face or his end, only that the head was taken and shown. A swordsman of Kai was halted at last by a master who had learned to make his blade speak a different grammar. Another line says, and we are supposed to be satisfied that the ledger balances. But between the head on the gate and the master's bow lies the space where a city adjusted its breath for weeks at a time, and the space never makes it to the page. Superstition does not invent itself fresh each morning. It is inherited like a tool and sharpened by need. There is talk in these years that slaughtering a count beyond counting hundreds, 1,000 can alter the murderer's fate, cure the fever that no herb can touch. By invincibility with interest and pain, rip a blessing from the reluctant hand of a god. A sane man would call this madness. A sick man or a scared one might call it a map. On nights when the wind moves slowly, you can hear, in the long grasses beyond the town, a blade's impatient breath. You tell yourself it is insects. You tell your children the same, and they believe you until they do not. Inside walls, where official voices still carry, edicts arise to answer what still begins. Some daimyo outlaw the testing of blades on the unwarned with language that reads as if the paper itself would like to hit something. Others are pragmatic. Keep your men busy with impropriety, or their energy will find the seams. Wherever power is luckier, tsujigiri ebbs. Wherever power is thin or busy elsewhere, it spreads like ink. There's no single law. There's only 1,000 attempts at order with 1,000 different seals. When the Tokugawa fix the lid on the kettle later, they do it with enough seriousness to esteem the practice out of fashion. Executions are made into theater for the purpose of mercy. That is, the mercy extended to possible future victims. Men who replay the crossroads ritual after the piece are hauled to public stages and ended in ways designed to instruct the nervous and the bold in equal measure. Stories from Edo will describe punishments as inventive as the crimes, but those belong to a quieter century. In the Sengoku dusk, there is no empire yet to choreograph deterrence. There's only the rumor of it arriving. Meanwhile, the craft of killing and the craft of a surviving shape each other. Swordsmiths sign their names deeper, proud or frightened of what their work will be asked to do. Some blades acquire reputations like courtesans, beautiful, expensive, and rumored to have driven men mad. Housewives sew family names into the hems of sleeves so bodies can be known if a road refuses to return a person whole. Priests bless crossroads as if the verb could be stronger than a hand trained to strike. In mountain passes, small altars sprout like stones rolled by careful fingers. Offerings to travelers' gods increase. Rice becoming more white each year as if purity could be stacked like sandbags against weather. And yet the world does not end every night. Most evenings, after the market spaces have been swept of onion skins and boast, men with sore backs and women with tight shoulders walk home under a sky that is more ink than ink could ever be. The kabukimono in gaudy sleeves laugh themselves hoarse and fall asleep in piles like puppies. A ronin sells his blade for a bowl of soup and agrees to escort a widow 3 streets for a coin that buys him warmth. Children practice being quiet when a drunk passes and then explode with whispering when the gate is closed. The danger is not the only a story, it is simply the loudest. Because danger is loud, those who quiet it become legends. A flute is said to have stilled a robber once on a pale road, the nobleman's song lifting in moonlight until the bandit's greed forgot its words. A tired master hears that a man has been trimming the city's courage and goes out alone to meet him at the crossing, where fear has learned to stand. The story does not record how long they bowed before cutting, only that the second cut was unnecessary. Tales like these are blankets. They do not lengthen the night, but they make it more bearable. What does a serial killer look like in a time when killing is a crop? He looks like anyone and like no one. He is the ronin whose eyes do not match his excuses. He is the pampered favorite with a smile that never reaches the muscle of his cheek. He is the sick man who believes arithmetic can bargain with fever. He's a set of footprints you decide not to follow to their end. He is a story the village tells with the window latched, and the city, stubborn as always, insists on its rituals. A tea whisk scrubs green into foam as if calm could be eaten. A poem is copied onto poor paper with excellent brushwork. A shrine maiden ties another strip of white to the sacred rope, and the paper shivers in the wind like the soul of someone who learned to take the long way home. When dawn comes, it is pink and impersonal. Roads stretch out their tired backs and invite feet onto them again. At the first crossroads past the town, an old man sits with a bundle of radishes and the willingness to chat about weather. People stop. They buy. They do not die. Most days, that is victory enough. Water keeps secrets longer than stone. On Lake Biwa, the mornings arrive like polished metal, and from Katada, the skiffs push out between reeds with the quiet competence of men who know where the shoals sit. Monks ride these boats as often as fishermen, pilgrims in rough robes carrying purses that are light with coins but heavy with vows, bound for temples in Otsu or Kyoto. The boatmen know the currents and the offerings. Piety and profit shared the same shoreline. One of those boatmen is the man the chronicles remember only enough to condemn Hio of Katada, a like pirate who learned the older trade first. For years, he likely did what most Coco Lake corsairs did skim tolls, like a taxman without a desk, wave down cargo with the authority of a drawn oar, deliver a wink and a warning in the same breath. Extortion is monotonous work when it succeeds. It is the day he decides monotony is beneath him that the water learns new names. Picture the night a narrow throat of lake made narrower by reeds, a second a skiff that is not supposed to be there, shadows that have learned to move like men. Hio's confederates come in low, the two hulls kiss with the soft thud of inevitability, and the passengers' prayers unspool into air that cannot carry them fast enough. The tale that will be told afterward counts 16-15 monks and 1 acolyte, but the number matters less than the method. Bodies push into black water, cut reeds tremble as if remembering later what they saw. By dawn, the lake has swallowed everything but rumor, and even rumor sounds like someone rowing away. It is not the first mass killing in a century that makes murder a weather report. It is, however, a line drawn darker than most across a face the community hopes is still recognizable. To slaughter men pledged to the Buddha and to steal the Buddha's purse is not only theft, it is insult, and insult multiplies consequences. The monasteries that rim these hills do not wield armies as kings do, but they command a currency the warlords respect, petitions and pilgrimages, shutters closed against commerce, sutras read with grief so loud even officials hear it. The monks take their outrage to the magistrates and to the great houses that police this water when it suits them. Justice, in a place where jurisdiction is a family heirloom, begins to assemble itself from favors and fear. Collective punishment is the grammar everyone understands. If a thief's name is a port's name, a port can be punished. The threat is not subtle. The hammers that repair keys can be confiscated, the nets taxed into uselessness, the men summoned for labor far from home until the message sinks like a stone. It is then the tales insist that another stone drops Hio's father, an elder of Katada, performs the old apology with a blade. The word the sources use is tairi seppuku, but the gesture is enormous, an attempt to lift the weight of a lake's anger with one body. Whether the threat is fully real or more theater than verdict, the effect works. The community is spared an official wrath larger than it can crack with pleading. You can decide, if you like, that Hio's repentance begins there too late for the 16, exactly on time for the man who raised him. He is said to shave his head and enter the path he desecrated, a monk carrying his own past like a begging bowl that never fills. The story is a small morality play, which is why it survives. Beyond its edge, something more complicated continues. Water bandits revert to tolls. Officials post new proclamations. Pilgrims look twice before boarding and 3 times before sleeping. Hio's choice, greed rising to massacre, is a singular in the records because it is bloodier than the ordinary predation of lake life, but he is not alone in the trade that made him possible. Muromachi, Japan is sewn together by water as much as by roads. On the Osaka-Kyoto corridor, river corsairs lurk along the Yodo and Uji, where current and commerce hurry together. On the inland sea, the Murakami and kindred clans learn to make extortion elegant. They issue safe conduct flags to ships that pay and teach the rest to call their losses an education. Their ledgers are written in the same hand as a daimyo's tax accounts. Their enforcement arrives faster. Violence at sea and on lakes is arithmetic. Kill too often and cargo ceases. Kill rarely and reputation fails. Most pirates learn the equation. They take the coins, ease the cargo past the reef they pretend is theirs to command. Lift a hand in farewell as if etiquette could launder their living. Now and then the arithmetic breaks under the weight of opportunity rumor of a temple's great offering, a merchant's unwise boast in a tea house, a captain who scorns a sign. That is when massacres happen, and the lists in the monasteries gather new names to chant. What makes a lake murder different from a roadside murder, other than the way water hides what earth reveals, is the speed with which vengeance can be generalized. A killer on the crossroads is a man. A killer on the lake can be a village. The law and the custom of shared liability make communities into insurers against their own sons. This does not always produce justice. It produces action. The father's deliberate death at Kadada is an answer framed in an older language. One life floated as a raft for many. It also tells you something about the pressure a small port feels when the great houses clear their throats. Temples are not only victims, they are landlords, patrons, and when pressed, political actors with very worldly instincts. The same mountain that sends saffron-robed pilgrims for alms has sent, in other decades, warrior monks to settle arguments with fire. Here, in this story, the monks wear only one face, the wounded, but the fuller history is more crowded. A monastery robbed of offerings is a patronage network starved of fuel. Its complaint gathers signatures from men who need its blessings to touch coin. When they press the prefecture, they are speaking for more than the drowned. Set the Katada outrage against the longer ledger of maritime predation and patterns a surface like sandbars at low tide. The Murakami in the Seto Inland Sea, growing from coastal toughs to naval brokers, offer a safe passage stamped with their emblem and early passport, and, when ignored, stage-boarding actions that teach captains the value of paper. Inland rivers, long policed by local magnates, become contested by ronin in boats, their blades more persuasive than tax receipts. When war contracts expand, pirates find themselves hired as escorts. When war contracts shrink, they remember how to collect on their own behalf. In each role, the possibility of killing repeats not as ritual compulsion, but as instrument and habit. Was Hio a serial killer in the sense you and I would recognize, compelled to repeat for his own dark hunger? The chronicles do not say that. They say he crossed a line from extortion to annihilation once, and that once echoed loudly enough to bruise a province. Others on water killed more than once, crews thrown overboard after refusal, passengers silenced to keep a route, untroubled by revenge, but the motive is mostly arithmetic, not appetite. Yet the effect for the living is the same. A waterway learns fear as quickly as a road. Enforcement ashore is fickle. Afloat, it's an art more than a policy. A daimyo declares a sweep of the lake to please a temple. The sweep nets a handful of small boats and a reputation. A magistrate posts rewards for names that the wind refuses to carry. Someone with an old grievance offers a new one. Patrols armed with crossbows and borrowed boats avoid the reed-choked shallows where the pirates sleep. What actually changes behavior is not the posted notice, but the rumor of a father dying for a son. What sticks in a man's mind as he launches the skiff at dawn is not a clause, it is a face. Katada recovers because ports must. Nets are mended because fish keep forgetting politics. Monks climb into boats again because faith is a route as fixed as any road. The lake does what lakes do, smooth yesterday into today, until the line is hard to see unless you know precisely where to look. On still afternoons, some swear you can hear chanting from the water near the narrows where the skiff was hemmed, wind through reeds given words by conscience. Whether you believe in ghosts or only in memory, the sound does its work. It slows a hand that might have reached for a purse. It firms a jaw that will refuse the quick coin and accept the long hunger. The story of Hyo of Katada survives because it hits three nerves at once: sacrilege against monks, communal guilt and reprieve, and a conversion that arrives like a late train, useful to the tale even if it would not impress a god. Around it spiral the broader lines of a century when predation turned professional on land and water. Pirates write invoices with oars, temples fight with petitions, fathers choose death to teach sons what the law cannot. And somewhere not far from shore, a skiff heir to Hyo's boat moves along the reed line, the oars muffled with cloth, its master calculating the price of mercy against the cost of blood. Next time, the lake is calm. Sit and watch how boats pass one another. Some raise an oar in greeting, some lower their eyes and attend to the water as if it were a patient. The difference is not always character. Sometimes it is merely appetite and arithmetic agreeing to be decent today. And that, like so much else in these violent centuries, is what safety looks like: a set of decisions no one writes down, renewed each dawn, as fragile as a reflection and just as real. There is another species of killer in these centuries, the kind who does not haunt crossroads or reed beds, but antechambers. He comes with a letter of introduction, or with a servant's tray, or as a shadow folded inside a retainer's retinue. If the lake pirate makes murder a sudden weather, this man makes it an instrument tuned, commissioned, and paid. Shinobi is the word that will gather them later like leaves in a hand. In their own time, they are on-mitsu hidden listeners, agents hired by lords who wish to spare themselves the vulgarity of battle by removing one heartbeat at a time. You do not find them in the chronicles by name. You find their work in the margins. An elder died unexpectedly. A captain of gates failed to rise. Talk ceased in such and such a hall. The ink grows thin where the knife was already sharp. Authority has always kept two ledgers, one for public victories, the other for necessary tidiness. In the Muromachi wars, when borders shift like dunes and loyalty is a commodity, a certain kind of man discovers his talent belongs to both books. He learns to wear silence as if it were a uniform. He learns that repetition is not compulsion, but craft. Over a decade, he will remove a dozen men and call none of it murder, because the one who pays him calls it housekeeping. From Iga's hill valleys and Koga's folded country come networks as informal as kin, and as stubborn as moss. The villages teach their boys to move without telling the bamboo they are coming. They teach the patience needed to watch a gate for 3 nights just to learn the rhythm of the guard's cough. In years when the rice is thin, these skills are rented. In years when the wars are thick, they are conscripted and given names like service and duty. A lord learns the taste for precision. Why commit 100 spears when a single hand in the right sleeve can loosen a province? Assassins move alongside a different, louder current, the mercenary companies whose piety is to powder and smoke. The Isaika marksmen in the Kii Peninsula sell their thunder to whoever writes the clearest promise, and their leader, Suzuki Magoichi, by one name among many, acquires a reputation overheard in the spaces between cheers and curses. He does not prowl alleys with a blade for the pleasure of it. He directs volleys, and over time, the dead accumulate around his name the way driftwood accumulates on a bend of river. To those he fights for, he is an instrument of deliverance. To those he fights against, he is simply a man who ensures that certain faces will not be seen again. Between those judgments lies the difference a century later between a soldier's monument and a criminal's rumor. You could argue quietly, somewhere safe, that such sanctioned killers are a form of serial murderer with paperwork. But keep in mind the difference that mattered then. Context is absolution. Violence inside the lines is heroism. Outside, it is pollution. A lord dispatching a shinobi to introduce sleep to a rival's bed is not committing a crime. He is shaping a map. The man who does the touching is as human as any bandit, and not always colder. He does his work. He eats. He gives alms to a roadside jizo, in case the world keeps count in a way no record keeper does. The city participates in this theater in Kyoto, where gossip is as quick as fire. Everyone learns the places where words become marks on lists, gatehouses, tea pavilions, garden paths where one can stroll and be noticed. A fan closes, a sleeve twitches, a servant trips with impeccable timing. Afterward, the carp keep opening their mouths beneath the bridge, and the reeds keep their secrets, and the chronicler writes, a change in the household. The dead man's retainers bow at the funeral with faces composed in equal parts grief, calculation, and relief. Temples are not exempt from this arithmetic. Sohei warrior monks have long fought as easily as they prayed. They do both with talent and sometimes with delegations. A monastery offends a lord, or a lord offends a monastery, and someone in a gray robe or a shabby russet one agrees to fix the mistake at the level of a throat. The job is done between vespers and dawn. Afterward, bells ring like absolution, because bells ring every morning. The city nods, the city forgets, the city remembers differently. There are, too, those who begin inside the lines and then drift. You meet them in the years when allegiance is more expensive than flesh. A retainer loses his stipend to a nephew's favor. A boarder shifts. A banner he followed burns in a courtyard. He takes to the roads with a blade and a hunger, and his technique does not vanish with his salary. Some ronins sell themselves to the highest bidder and keep their names. Others go to ground, earning coin at the far edge of honest work, escorting, guarding, recovering what was misplaced. A few find they can no longer cross back from the quiet to the street. Killing, which was once the punctuation of a career, becomes, for them, a grammar. They repeat because repetition pays, and because the eye dulls if not used. It is difficult in such a world to draw the lesson that comforts a later age that evil has a shape all its own. Here, evil borrows the body that can pay for it. One lord's removal is another lord's martyrdom. Records have an odd habit of surviving in single copies, copied by men with opinions. The killers, without patrons, crossroad slashers, opportunists with a superstition about numbers, those are easy to name and condemn. The men who serve professionally and therefore repeatedly, whose violence adds up quietly, those are cataloged as means. And yet, even the professional leaves a human trail. A gatekeeper whispers to his wife that his captain has been coughing in a strange way since the new steward arrived. A maidservant notices a guest whose sandals are the right size for a soldier but whose feet move like a farmer's. A moneylender counts his clients and wonders why those who borrow from a certain district stop sending notes around the equinox. A priest hears confession, in which the sin never touches a noun. I did as I was bid. I said the name afterward. I will not do it again unless the order comes. From time to time, the theater goes wrong. A lord misjudges and sends a letter to two men, not one. Both arrive, and both discover the other. Steel sings in a vestibule cultivated for ikebana. A favorite falconer sees too much and does not understand his importance until he is already understanding something else with a blade for a teacher. A poison proves impatient. When the mistake is obvious, the patron repairs it by unmaking the man who made him look foolish. Even in sanctioned seriality, the old rule holds killers are disposable. Reputation is not. By the late 16th century, as war fattens and feuds gain logistics, the craft professionalizes. Spy networks are written into ledgers, payments are tabulated. The word shinobi becomes an office rather than a rumor, and with office comes control. The same lords who hired shadows to thin their enemies now outlaw the unsanctioned versions, the crossroads killers, the thrill seekers, the blade testers, because only one kind of repetition is now allowed, the kind that answers to a seal. When the early Tokugawa regimes make examples of tsujigiri with the public cruelty refined into doctrine, they are not ending violence, they are monopolizing it. Does the city sleep better with murder in uniform? Not exactly, but it learns a new lullaby that if killing must happen, let it happen invisibly and for reasons someone can sign. That belief, half hope, half habit, carries people through their chores. Bread is baked, petitions are filed, weddings are held in halls that, last year, heard a different sort of oath. In private, a mother tells a son what not to say in inns. In public, a lord walks through a gate where a rival would have stood, and the guards shout the correct titles with relief, audible in the lost syllable. History will make much of these shadows later, will dress them in black and teach them tricks they did not need. It will turn men with ordinary hands and extraordinary patience into legends. That is fine. Legends are one way a society pays deferred wages. What matters for our quiet purposes tonight is simpler. In an age when murder could be a career path, repetition could wear a mask, an account of the dead could be tucked inside a ledger under the name expenses. Human choices still showed through. A shopkeeper who did not mention what he saw, a scribe who inserted a misplaced honorific that delayed a warrant, a sentry who listened to a sound and decided not to decide. Against the grand engines of sanctioned killing, small mercies persisted, repeated themselves, became their own kind of serial act. So, when you next imagine those streets, Kyoto's lanes with their rain-dark timbers, castle corridors smelling of lacquer and sweat, Remember both theaters, the alley where a blade waits for the passerby, no one will miss, and the vestibule where a sleeve hides a knife meant for a man who will be mourned in bells. One is crime and one is policy. To the dead, the difference is theoretical. To the living, it made all the difference in how the story would be told. The decade people later called the Onin years does not end so much as fray. Kyoto pulls itself to pieces street by street, mansions combusting into private suns, factions moving house behind palisades of torn shutters. And when the embers settle, nobody is quite in charge. That condition, less a peace than an unending permission, spreads outward along the great roads. The word Sengoku, age of warring states, will arrive later, tidy as a label pinned to a robe, living through it. You simply know that orders travel shorter distances than spears. With authority cracked, violence learns to live in daylight. Things that used to be a scandal men drilling in temple courtyards, tolls demanded at makeshift gates, strangers carrying two swords where one would do grow ordinary, then invisible. Markets continue because markets always do, but stalls now sit under watchtowers, and the chest where a merchant kept silk swatches acquires a false bottom for coin and a dagger. Villages throw up low earthworks like awkward smiles. The shrine's rice granary is braced with extra beams. The headman's ledger grows a column for gifts to whoever holds the crossroads this week. Along the highways, Ashigaru foot soldiers on leave without leave move like weather. Some are loyal to banners, some only to their stomachs. They come hungry, then helpful, then hungry again. A farmer learns to read their moods the way he reads the sky. If they admire the lacquer on a rice chest, he produces tea as a diversion. If they ask about daughters, he mentions a fever in the next house and lifts his eyes toward the good luck rope over the door, as if rope were stronger than men. In a world where the law has forgotten how to speak, courtesy becomes a dialect of defense. Castle towns rise where estates once held poetry contests. Around them, neighborhoods organize themselves with an instinct older than edicts, 5-house alliances, watch rotations, the quiet rule that when one roof burns, everyone forms a line for buckets, whether the house belongs to a cousin or a stranger. Mutual responsibility is not kindness. It is insurance. If a killer passes through, you listen for the first rumor, a man in a dark haori at dusk, a blade that does not shine, and the second he did it again, and you post boys at corners to count how often the same sandals show in different lanes. It is not a police force, it is a net woven from fear and habit. Tsujigiri, the crossroads killing that once rang as a samurai's boast, widens in this loosened world from duel to sport to superstition. A newly rich young retainer, drunk on brocade and victory, cuts because his friends expect him to. Another cuts because he has heard a monk murmur that numbers have powers and 1,000 is a stairway. Blade testing becomes an excuse the way a cough excuses a pause. Swordsmiths hear whispers that their work has been proven and flinch. In some domains, a stern lord stamps it out with the only currency that passes for law spectacle. Across the next ridge, a different lord tolerates anything that keeps his men fierce. So a farmer walking at night must carry not only his load, but the luck of which ridge he is walking under. The city of Kyoto, reknotted after its long tearing, becomes a place where strangers are both business and hazard. Mashishu, the guild-like citizens who run wards when courtiers cannot hire night watchmen who carry wooden clappers and encouragement more than authority. They have a trick to arrive at an alley mouth just in time to make the would-be thief feel observed, and therefore, for an instant, human again. It does not always work. Sometimes clappers are the last sound a man hears, but the rhythm of them pattering through lanes teaches people that the city is not abandoned to wolves. It still possesses a heartbeat. Pirates do on water what bandits do on land, riding toll in spray and iron. The Murakami clans in the inland sea paint their banners with the characters for their own names and charge fees, as if running a customs house. Pilots from their islands can thread a fleet through currents that chew a stone. They can also run down a rice barge at dusk and leave nothing but a wake and a story. Some captains pride themselves on clean piracy tariffs without killing, because the next invoice is easier if the last ship's crew is alive to grumble about it. Others, like the lake murderer we have met, discard restraint when temptation is heavy enough to sink a conscience. On shore, towns learn to answer for the watermen who shelter in their coves. Collective punishment makes everyone a policeman, badly paid and frightened. Elsewhere, the Iko-Iki leagues of commoners and monks, bound by shared faith and shared grievance, fortify provinces into peoples. In Kaga, the one province ruled for a season by those leagues. Killing belongs to committees. Enemies disappear as if erased with a brush. A lord calls them rebels, a tenant calls them neighbors. If an assassin strikes for their counsels, he is received as a servant. If he strikes against them, he is memorialized as a wolf. In such climates, serial violence wears a sash of purpose and walks beneath banners, and the question, is he a criminal, becomes a question about which shrine you bow toward. Even courtesy rituals sprout thorns, hostages, an old device for guaranteeing promises, become furniture in the castle a son raised in a rival's household as proof of peace. He grows tall. He learns a different province's grammar. A decade later, two men he has never met decide whether his heart beats tomorrow. When lords quarrel, they do not always muster armies first. Sometimes a letter is sealed. A man in plain clothes travels, and by the time torches are lit, the new map has already been drawn in a private room. Violence repeats because policy repeats. Counting the bodies would mean counting the meetings. Coin is scarce, rice is counted. Payment often happens in kind. Violence, too, takes its pay in kind. A gang of Ronin collects protection by ensuring that a rival gang can no longer walk. A magistrate looking to prove his relevance after months of being ignored makes a public case of one murderer and ignores 4 others, because a crowd requires a villain who fits an afternoon's script. Heads are displayed to reassure everyone that cause and effect still visit the same address. People file past, some counting, some pretending not to count. Children stare until mothers pull them away, and then the children look behind the fingers. The kabukimono stroll in their gold-threaded madness. Sleeves like banners, hair like pines in a storm. They pick fights for punctuation and practice the art of being seen. One of them may also be the man who, 3 nights running, chose the same bend in the road and the same method. But in the bright daylight of his costume, he looks like a symptom, not a culprit. And the city prefers symbols. They are easier to ban. The edict that follows forbids flamboyance and blade length, as if cloth and steel alone committed the wrong. For a week, the lanes are calmer. Then someone with a quiet haori returns to the bend in the road with a blade the exact legal length. Villagers develop rituals that are neither Buddhist nor Shinto, but a local theology of safety. A twig gate tied across a lane at dusk to warn strangers that someone is watching. A pebble placed on a shrine step each morning to count how many nights a certain old woman has returned safely from the fields. A charm of rice straw hung on the lintel when a rumor of murders ripples down from the hills. The charms do not stop still. They say, "To neighbors and to gods, we have not forgotten one another." Stories circulate with the tenacity of ivy. A man in Suruga who killed 5 travelers because he believed the 6th would cure his fever. A gate guard at a castle town who marked the hands of killers with ink so faint only he could see it. A monk who took confessions in a roadside hut and sent certain men away with a string of beads and a task dig irrigation ditches until your shoulders forget. You cannot verify most of them, and yet you tell them because they let you believe that there are patterns in the noise, that the bad can be recognized by habit and the good can be done by hand. Some lords try to reassemble order out of scraps. They post notices in markets, mutual punishment for brawlers, both sides fined, both sides shamed, so that men learn not to start a fight. They cannot finish politely. They fix prices, forbid night swords, institute curfews that are ignored, and then, after a bad month, suddenly obeyed. They send patrols on predictable routes because predictability itself soothes. And then they learn the obvious killers a step one alley aside. A few lords, sharper, send patrols on no pattern at all and publish a lie about their regularity. That trick works for a season until men learn the new unpredictability and become careful only in the wrong hours. All the while, the logic that makes serial murder possible, displacement, hunger, the sense that the prison is nobody's responsibility, becomes normal. When your house can be requisitioned by 2 different armies in a year and the shrine's bell can be melted into a cannon, you train your soul to live in smaller rooms. You protect your children first and your conscience second. And you tell yourself you will switch the order when the world does. A man who kills 3 times on 3 roads belongs to this mentality. He has narrowed the world down to a blade and a purse, and the superstition that a number, if reached, will weave a net strong enough to hold him. And yet, even here, the contrary rhythm persists. The woman who steps between a stranger and a swaggering soldier because she is older and therefore she believes immune. The boy who walks the late path singing loudly so the man in the hedgerow will decide to try tomorrow instead. The headman who invents a local festival with lanterns on the very night. The rumor says cutting happens, light laid like a moat. When someone asks what good any of that does, the answer is quiet and stubborn. We are still here. Survival, too, can be serial. By the time the warlords with long visions begin to stitch the map into something like a garment, people are exhausted with improvisation. They will accept harshness in exchange for predictability. When new proclamations arrive that make tsujigiri a capital sin and make patrols an institution, there are cheers because the habit of cheering for rules returns with surprising speed. But memory has teeth. in the mouths of those who lived through it. The Sengoku age remains not only battles and banners, but the 1,000 little repetitions killings in lanes, in reeds, at gates that taught a country to hold its breath. Exhaling will take a generation. Stand at a country crossroads after nightfall and listen. The pond is a black coin. Frogs speak their blunt syllables. Wind rubs pine against pine. You hear it then, the soft hiss of a scabbard's mouth, the click of 2 teeth when a man tightens his jaw. In the late Muromachi world, a crossing is not only where roads meet, it is where custom does. A warrior who has drunk too much swagger, a youth heavy with a new blade and older stories, steps from the shade and makes a stranger into an answer. The word for it is old and deceptively tidy tsujigiri, crossroads cutting. Once it could still be argued as a duel's cousin, a way to prove skill when witnesses were few, and reputation was a currency that lost value if left unspent. As order frayed, the practice fell through all its former justifications: a sport in one province, superstition in another, cruelty in most. You can draw its slope at the fat edges of towns where armed young men strut in outrageous sleeves, kabukimono. Peacocks who make insolence a costume, tsujigiri, becomes punctuation, a flourish added to a night. In castle hinterlands where banners sway more often than laws, the cut is explained as testing, and the blade itself receives the compliment sharp enough, true enough, baptized in blood elsewhere. The act calcifies into ritual. A man whispers to a shrine that numbers have power, that the ladder to health or fortune is made of ribs, and that the count 10, 100, 1,000 must be climbed one anonymous step at a time. The story you hear again and again, a retainer who believes 1,000 dispatches will cure a sickness or make the gods notice him. He works at the problem like a clerk, night after night, until the town invents a curfew that is really a prayer. Alongside this, another custom grows in daylight: tamashigiri, formal test cutting where the steel's virtue is proved on bodies that cannot complain. In Edo times, when peace returns with rules, the condemned will be used for this purpose, and blades will carry proud inscriptions on their tangs: 2 bodies, 3, a grim accounting that turns sharpness into curriculum vitae. Before that tidy cruelty, the line between testing and murder is less a line than a fog. Swordsmiths wince when they hear a customer praised for a night's work. They intended their craft for battle where names are at least known. Townsfolk learn, with a patience no one envies, the difference between the swaggering cut that ends in laughter and the quiet one that repeats, returns, insists. It is not all rumor. There are men with names. You meet one at a distance. In the early Edo years, when peace is new enough to seem fragile, Magara Shogoro, a masterless swordsman who walked Edo's lanes on a hot evening and decided that each passerby was a rung. He killed and killed again. 8 dead and 10 wounded by dawn, according to city talk, that will swell and shrink with each retelling. When arrested, he pleaded not madness but mathematics. At Adago Shrine, he said a message had been granted him: kill 1,000 and your wishes will be made real. He asked calmly to be allowed to continue. The new authorities, anxious to demonstrate that the age of license had ended, gave him a different arithmetic: 1 life, 1 verdict. His decapitation was quick, the display afterward was not. Fear makes lessons theatrical. If you trace Shogoro's logic backward, you find its root hair-thin in older soil. Muromachi anecdotes remember retainers who believed dispatching 1,000 souls would bleach their own illness from the body, or make their skin proof against iron. Monks and grandmothers both swore to hearing it and to warning against it. A samurai who slipped into a fever of counting would roam crossroads like a sickness, on 2 legs until a better blade, or a lord with a taste for order, or a circle of neighbors who refused to travel after dusk, broke the pattern. There are stories of hunters becoming hunters of men in return. There are also stories where no one was quick enough, and the count went higher than a town can say aloud without trembling. Edicts arrive like furniture in a house that has slept on the floor too long, domain by domain at first, then from the center with the stamp of great names. The laws say what everyone already prays: crossroads. Killings bring death to the killer. The same sheets ban the kabukimono's sleeves, set the legal length of blades, order curfews, require lanterns at doorposts, and oaths among neighbors. It is not justice as a philosopher might define it. It is a long list written in the diction of prevention. Tokugawa proclamations will eventually point directly at tsujigiri by name and make the penalty both certain and, when theater is deemed useful, public. Gallows, crucifixion. Heads on pikes, fresh as the dawn. Methods vary by domain and decade, but in spirit they are the same argument: not here, not anymore. Edo's bureaucracy adds joints to the skeleton of safety. Sekisho checkpoints grip roads like knuckles. Passes are demanded, names recited, bundles prodded. The 5-house system, Goningumi, makes neighbors guarantors of one another's daytime conduct and nighttime whereabouts. The effect is not always comfort. It is a net that the killer can find a hole in if he is lucky and the net is tired. But because the hole moves, because the clappers sound in different lanes each night, habit returns to the city like a cautious cat. Even in towns that never see an official, you watch the same mechanism, older and more human, slot into place, watch rotations, lanterns, gossip as a form of patrolling. In the ledger of the ward, tsujigiri entries thin and then, by the middle of the 17th century, disappear into cautionary tales told to keep children close to doorways. The swords themselves keep their biographies. Some carry stamps from the days when testing was done, on rolled tatami soaked to mimic flesh. Others bear darker boasts from an era that liked its proof warm. In a smithy at the edge of a Kessel town, a young apprentice runs a finger along a line of Heian wave, frost, mountain, and asks whether a blade remembers. His master answers, like an old man who has taught this lesson too often, steel remembers what hands make it do. The boy nods as if he has seen a ghost. In a way, he has. Meanwhile, pirates who learned to charge tariffs wear uniforms. Their banners are folded into registries. Toll becomes tax. Inland, the loudest peacocks are shorn of their sleeves and given jobs that make their hands useful fire brigades, neighborhood patrols, the tasks that give swagger a schedule. There are pockets where a lord tolerates more night than his neighbor's old customs. Indulgence for a favorite, but the current runs one way, and across the entire archipelago a certain bedtime settles. It does not end cruelty. It lowers its frequency the way rain turns to mist. What does not depart is memory's taste for story. People do not recite edicts to each other over tea. They recite incidents. The old man who lived because he set his lantern in a certain way that made a killer believe a husband was home. The woman who walked with a bundle of dried fish on her head, and thus was spared because the blade lingering in the hedge wanted silk. The foolish cousin whose pride made him stop to argue with a drunk retainer and who paid for the argument with his throat. A generation later, those stories acquire smoother edges and the wrong names. A generation after that, they are plays. Kabuki makes villains handsome. The puppet stage gives ogres speeches. Tsujigiri becomes an area in which the singer's tragedy is that he cannot stop cutting. The audience shivers and goes home along lantern-bright lanes where the worst thing likely to happen is a stumble. We like to think good law ended evil habit, as if one document could close a road forever. The truth is more homely. A practice ends because too many people learn to refuse it as smiths who will not grin at praise for proof, lords who discovered that peace, though bad for glory, is good for taxes, neighbors who understand that watching the street is a collective art. Magara Shogoro's petition, "Let me go on," meets again and again. A civic answer, no. That refusal, repeating, is the real edict. And yet in the middle of a summer night, even in the years when order has grown as tight as the weave of a tatami mat, a crossroads can still feel like a test. You stand a heartbeat longer than is wise, and you listen to insects, to wind, to your own careful breath, and you remember that an age ended here, at places like this, one repetition at a time. In the morning, markets will open and blades will glint where they are supposed to glint, on stalls selling kitchen knives. Tonight, the pond is a black coin, and you go home by the better lit lane because law and luck work best together. Water at night is a quiet accomplice. On Lake Biwa, the oars move like breath, and the shoreline becomes a ribbon of darker dark. It is the late 15th century, and a small boat carries 15 traveling monks and a young acolyte toward a temple in Kyoto. Their offerings wrapped coins, silk, small lacquered boxes sit beneath a mat. The boatman bows without flourish and sets his shoulders to the work. His name, spoken softly by those who know him, is Hio of Karada, a local waterman with a reputation that means simply this: he gets you across. The lake tightens into a narrow strait where current and wind push against the hull from opposite minds. Lanterns drowse. The monks, in their traveling hoods, murmur sutras for a safe passage. That is when the second boat glides from shadow as if the reeds had learned to row. Men rise like elements from the gunwale's poles, hooks, short swords, and in the small world of two boats tied by fear, there is only wood, breath, and the sound of decisions being made. The ambush is efficient. Those who leap are speared. Those who kneel are cut. Those who run out of choices are pushed under, their prayers followed by bubbles. By dawn, the lake holds 16 dead. By noon, Hio holds the treasure that was never meant for him. We call him pirate, and it is not wrong, though the Lake Biwa word is sometimes softer, a toll taker on water, a man who knows currents and charges for that knowledge. Inland seas and lakes are threaded with such men in these years. Some operate under a village's wink, some under a local lord's blind eye, most under a code that says living merchants pay again next week while dead men pay only once. Temptation is the enemy of code. Hiyo hears of rich offerings and decides that a single windfall will do what 100 careful fairies cannot. It is not unique as crimes go, it is unique in how loudly it echoes. Katada is a town that eats and breathes by the lake. Boats, nets, barrels, its vocabulary is water. When word of the slaughter floats back to shore, it hits like winter. Monks on the road bring a formal wrath with them. A temple envoy, polite and implacable, arrives with an inventory of the dead and a living coin of influence. Muromachi officials, who normally file petitions and complaints in stacks that never touch the light, promise this one will not be mislaid. Collective responsibility is the grammar of justice. In such times a town harbors a wolf. The whole forest answers for the sheep. Punishment is discussed in the plural levies, seizures, burning of boats. Perhaps men made examples at the lakeside where the reeds will never forget it. The story, recorded and retold, always pauses here to show you another man, the father. He's older than Hiyo by the exact number of disappointments a father accumulates. When the envoy's words are done and the officials have finished tightening their belts for emphasis, the father steps forward and chooses a language both sides understand. He kneels, he asks no favors. He invokes obligation to neighbors who did not row that night but would pay for it now, to children who were born into the wrong harbor. Then he opens his own belly and offers Katada a different arithmetic, one life against many. Seppuku is not performed in courts as a spectacle in those days, not for fishermen, not for common watermen's kin. Here it becomes a negotiation. Blood is a petition that cannot be misplaced. In the versions that pass through fishermen's mouths and monks' mouths alike, the gesture works. The authorities, who had come to take a town by the throat, take instead an example. Reprisals narrow. An order is posted. A head or two besides Hiyo's may still be demanded. But the great punishments, the burning, the confiscations that starve winter, are set aside. It is easy, centuries later, to call the act barbarous or noble. In the moment, it is calculation dressed as sacrifice. A father who knows how power prefers its apologies. Hiyo's own ending bends a different way. The man who could not find remorse for 16 strangers discovers he has a surplus of it when the 16th becomes his father. He does what many in medieval Japan do when their life's ledger will not balance. He runs to the only desk that still takes vows. His head is shaved. He trades his boat for a rosary and a temple name. He is seen on roads where men with new tonsures walk slowly, chanting the Nembutsu as if the syllables were a bridge sturdy enough for regret to cross. We do not learn if he sleeps. The tale is more interested in whether he is seen. In some retellings, he spends years digging graves for those who have none, as if shovels could move karma like earth, that a monk could be a murderer, and a monk is less strange in the period than we might think. The lake's rim is ringed by great houses of the Buddha and Ryakuji above, proud and contentious. Midera nearby, learned and fiery, and their power flows down the slopes into the watermen's economy. Offerings travel in boats, so the quarrels, armed sohei, warrior monks, are one generation's scandal and the next generation's memory of how tax and prayer share a staircase. Hiyo's victims are not only men in robes, they are letters of credit to a different world, murdered in transit. His repentance is a conversion, not from violence to peace, but from power's small calculus to a larger one he hopes will be kinder at the end. Step back from the single boat, and the lake widens to its proper scale. Piracy in these centuries is not only a romance of knives in fog, it is a system, sometimes official in all but name. On the inland sea, families such as the Murakami grow from toll collectors into naval powers with flags that flutter as if they were legal documents. On lakes, the same habits wear smaller coats. A pilot demands a fee to pass a headland. A flotilla escorts a barge that has not asked for company. A lord counts casks and looks away from what pays his foot soldiers. Most of the time, the violence is theatrical, a spear tapped against a deck, a warning shot of words. Some of the time it is real. When crews resist or windfalls tempt, the ledger stains. The Lake Biwa massacre shocks precisely because it angers two worlds at once: the monasteries that rely on the long, slow rope of offerings, and the magistrates who dislike crimes that make them look toothless. It gives both a chance to prove their teeth. The case becomes a wall poster your grandfather remembers decades later, an example to quote in disputes over collective punishment, in sermons about filial duty, in gossip about which towns keep their bad men on a short leash, and it leaves its private ghosts, the fishermen, who will not row that channel at night, the widow who dreams of bubbles, the child who grows up knowing his grandfather was both criminal kin and savior of a harbor. It also sharpens a lesson common people already live by, that the line between sanctioned violence and unsanctioned violence moves like a shoreline. A lord who uses oarsmen to collect his due is righteous. A boatman who collects his own due is a pirate. A warrior who kills in battle brings honor. A warrior who kills in a lane after curfew is a disease the town must sweat out. Context is not an excuse. It is the weather that makes some crimes sprout and others wither. Hio's father knows this too. He cuts in the only direction that might make the weather change. In later centuries, when the country quiets under the Tokugawa and boats drift on Lake Biwa with passengers who bring parasols and songs instead of fear, the story remains in circulation like an old coin. Playwrights will glimpse it and pass by too raw to make handsome, too simple to turn into a love triangle. Local people keep it nearer to bone. Do not be Hio, a mother says to a boy who grows too bold on the pier. Be his father, the boy asks. Be neither, she says. Be the man who rows and brings everyone home. Stand again at the lake's edge, this time at dusk with swallows stitching the air. The water is as calm as a held breath. Barges move toward the Seta and the river that leads to the capital. In one boat, a chest sits beneath a mat, heavy with coins and prayers. In another, a pilot hums to keep his stroke true. Everything that happened can happen. Everything that did happen keeps happening, differently. You watch until the lanterns become the stars, and the stars become lanterns again. And you understand why that night remained a story worth retelling, not because pirates are romantic, but because one man's arithmetic and another man's changed a town's sum. Kyoto after midnight has its own tide. Paper lanterns glitter, shutters breathe, and the alleys that by day sell incense and ink become corridors of listening. A courier hurries with a letter that will matter to men who never touch their own blades. He counts his steps between corners the way monks count beads. Somewhere above him, a bamboo pole squeaks in its bracket, and the note is not quite wind. The first sound he truly notices is his own breath stop. By dawn, the letter will arrive anyway, delivered by another hand and stamped with a seal stolen the week before. The city will whisper the same old explanation dressed in a new name, shinobi. Our words fail us a little here, across centuries and across the haze of theater and boast. Call them infiltrators, scouts, fire setters, messengers who preferred roofs to roads. Ninja is the later costume they wear in our heads. In the long wars of the 14th and 15th centuries, certain provinces' sullen hills and tough farms in Iga and Koga trained men to move like news. Lords bought that movement. Sometimes the task was to map a gate's latch or to measure the hours of a watch. Sometimes it was to bring a letter out or a rumor in, and yes, sometimes, when the purse was heavy and the path sure, it was to visit a blade upon a throat that had been judged by someone else. The chroniclers do not give us their names, they give us only effects: a rival fallen in a garden, a fire uncoiling inside a storehouse, a bridge that turned out under a certain horse's weight to be more memory than wood. If you seek a modern word for such men, serial feels wrong on the tongue. They were not compelled by private storms, but employed by public ones, killers, on retainer rather than in hiding. There were retainers too, who lived not in the margins, but in the halls. Every daimyo kept at least one loyal knife whose portfolio included tasks no oath would print, a troublesome steward along a border, a courier who changed sides too fluently, a provincial notable whose taxes arrived light and whose letters arrived late. Over years, such a man might accumulate a ledger more crowded than any bandit's, and yet his lord paid his stipends on time, sent him pheasant at New Year, patted the shoulder that held such a steadiness. In the chronicles, the euphemisms are tender removed, punished, fell ill. The work is not tender at all. Walk down from the hill forts into the plain and you meet other serialities, less tidy. A war ends without paying every soldier. A retainer's lord falls and no hand reaches to lift the man who served him. It is not that these warriors fall in love with killing, it is that killing is the one trade they can still sell when the market is flooded with swords. Some hire on with whomever will feed them a merchant who wants a rival frightened into prudence, a minor priest who would prefer a rival abbot to be remembered only in lists. Others drift into the profession the way a river drifts into a low place. Kabukimono first for swagger, then for supper young men in loud sleeves and louder hair, testing blades on clay jars, and then, when jars are scarce, on anyone who will not be missed until morning. We met them earlier at Crossroads. Here they gather in gangs, a fashion made of hunger and pride. They begin as an attitude and end up as a hazard, the kind of group a magistrate pretends not to see until someone important bleeds. And then there are the saika, the merchants of fire, men of matchlock and pike down in Ki and Izumi, who sell their discipline to the highest bidder, under a leader whose name later storytellers will attach to ballads and boasts. They become a kind of freelance army, sometimes defending their home district with zeal, sometimes marching for a lord whose purse has the right clink. Do their massacres count as crime or campaign? Ask the victims, and the answer is easy. Ask the chroniclers, and the answer depends on who won the next battle. What the age teaches, again and again, is that motive can be as simple as pay and as complicated as loyalty, and that law loses its voice when drums beat. The result is a moral weather that changes by district. A knife in the dark is murder in one town and policy in another. In a domain where the Lord prizes order because his harvest is good, a tsujigiri youth will find himself tied to a post by noon, his flamboyant sleeves already cut into rags for cleaning the executioner's blade. In a valley where the Lord is away at war and his deputy drinks more than he inspects, that same youth will strut as if the street belongs to his boots. Villagers learn to read these climates with the accuracy of men who must walk their children past doorways. In summer, they shut early. In winter, they keep the hearth hot for guests they did not invite. This is not to say the age has no conscience. It has several, and they quarrel. Buddhist preachers on the great roads say the same thing they have always said. Refrain from taking life. Every creature once was your mother. But even in monasteries, doctrine and sword share a corridor. Some temples keep their hands clean in doctrine and hire them out in practice. Others go to war without wincing. They're warrior monks drilling in courtyards where sutras are also read. Meanwhile, the shrines speak another language, pollution and purification, and any blood spilled near the village. Tori sets a whole week aside for sweeping and prayer. You can feel the city try to shrug off a killing by scrubbing flagstones, by hanging new paper charms, by holding a festival with more lanterns than usual. Sometimes it works, sometimes the air remembers what the stones will not. The men who sell death for hire do not all die in the same poem. A few are caught and named on wooden boards and punished, where everyone can learn the lesson even if no one can agree what it is. A few retire, buy land, and change their names, much as a butcher in another country might aspire to sell only bread in his old age. A very few find that their hands shake when the work is done, and they shave their heads and set out on the long road of chanting. The rest go on until steel or fever stops them, and the record keeps them only as a ripple in another man's story. On that night, my grandfather told me the man who had killed 3 in the next valley was himself found floating face down among the reeds. From time to time, a lord tries to draw a line. He names the kinds of killing he will tolerate and the kinds he will not. And the list reads like the rules of a game that no one else admits to playing. Murder for personal gain, no. Killing by ambush under orders acceptable when signed and sealed. Street swagger a stain on the domain, severed the stain. Execution of prisoners after surrender frowned upon, unless the prisoners are from a family that burned our granaries last winter. The document looks official. The wind that tugs at its corners looks amused. The first time a useful assassin saves a campaign, the line smudges. Listen to a city on a day when a sanctioned killing has been done in the night. Shoji rattle open, stalls wake, a dog noses the gutter, a child chases a hoop. The body is gone because bodies are made to disappear quickly in any town that intends to keep selling rice and paper without the price of everything doubling. The rumors, though, have found their pace. A bathhouse woman says a cousin's friend heard the shout. A porter imitates the soft cry a blade makes when it decides. A clerk invents a nickname for the killer because a nickname is easier to carry around than a lecture. By evening, the story has a moral in one neighborhood and a punchline in another. It depends on which lord you fear and which lord you hate, and who pays for your daughter's rice. There are names posterity will try to fix to this Merc household names to us now, banners in our memory of warlord days. The trouble is that the neatness of their legend cannot hide the smears beneath. A captain praised for breathtaking marksmanship is also remembered in certain villages as the man who slaughtered prisoners on a day when the sun had already done enough burning. A hero of ambush is also the reason 3 brothers in a hamlet never married because there were no girls of their age left after a certain spring. The songs keep the beat simple so that it can be danced to. The truth, when you let it breathe, has more steps. It is tempting to sort the age into boxes: outlaw killers, righteous instruments, rogues gone wrong, noble knives. The city refuses to sit in our storage. Men did awful things for money and wore crests while they did them. Men did awful things for the sport and wore their hair in careful disorder. Men did awful things for ideas and wrote poems about cherry blossoms between campaigns. And sometimes, rarely, and therefore worth repeating, a man refused to do an awful thing and paid for that refusal with the only coin the age accepted. These, too, are serial acts, rare enough to shine negations repeated, refusals multiplied. One last picture before we fold this page. The courier we left in the alley at the beginning is already elsewhere, inside the story's machinery. In a house that smells of ink and cedar, a lord breaks open the letter that nonetheless arrived, reads the information that will bring an enemy's granary into range of fire, and closes his eyes with satisfaction. The man who paid for the letter's safe arrival lifts a cup not to the assassin, but to the plan that needed him. In another district, a magistrate lays out on his desk 2 reports, one about a boy cut down at a corner by a gang in bright sleeves, one about a fever that carried away a troublesome steward. He signs the first with sharp ink and sends men with truncheons. He shelves the second without a mark, the same hand, the same day. The border between crime and policy is not a line on a map. It is the face a city makes when a blade chooses a throat. In these centuries, that face changes from ward to ward, lord to lord. The souls it leaves behind: wives, brothers, clerks who picked up the wrong bundle for delivery do not change so quickly. They light sticks of incense. They tell their children where not to walk. They watch the moon in the well and wish to see only the moon. Dawn in Edo or Kyoto or any town stubborn enough to call itself a capital still begins with water. Buckets slosh. A shopkeeper sprinkles his threshold. A woman rinses a rice pot and watches the swirl disappear into the street's shallow runnel. Then comes a different moistness, metallic in the throat. Officials in hemp coats have been up since the hour of the tiger, and now a wooden placard is carried into a square. The characters are neat and square-shouldered. They tell you what everyone already knows: a sentence has been carried out. The phrase is as old as the stone and as brisk as the clerk's cough. The law has been applied. What the law looks like depends on who you are and how much thunder your name carries. In the war centuries we've walked through, justice often arrived with a horse behind it or a torch ahead. And whatever happened afterward was called order because the loudest voice said so, as the lords who would become Tokugawa begin to lay roads over the ruts and name rules that even samurai must pretend to read. Punishment takes on a new ambition: deterrence. Heads set on a stakes are not merely proofs of a case closed. They are punctuation marks meant to halt a sentence that begins, "Perhaps I could get away with." Beheading is the common grammar, clean, quick, and public enough to teach, but the harsher tenses exist for crimes the magistrates decide are larger than one body. Crucifixion, which in Japan is a two-post affair, not the cross of foreign missionaries, but an X of bamboo. Nails through wrists, sometimes through ankles. The body displayed for 2 days while crows practice their craft, then buried at a crossroads the way impurities are placed where roads will grind them into dust. There is the pit, a hole roofed with boards, where a condemned person is buried up to the waist and cut until confession arrives or breath fails, rare even in an age that was not squeamish. There's also the sawing two boards, a body bound between a blade worked by two men in an unmusical rhythm. The exception proves only that the rule was a rule take a life outside the map of permission. Lose yours under the same sky you stained, and yet the same city that arranges its executions like theater keeps other theaters open. Samurai who bring home enemy heads from sanctioned battle are rewarded with land stipends and poems. Their trophy display is an art and a ceremony, perfumed and ranked. Later, when a murderer's head is set above a prison gate, it is chalked, labeled, and left to weather's criticism. The two practices look at each other across the centuries and do not blush. The difference is context, the difference is permission, the difference is who writes the record. The magistrates write in two inks. One is black and thin ordinances, posted warnings, bans. In one domain, tsujigiri is named for the first time not as tradition, but as felony. Whoever tests steel upon a passerby will be cut down and their dwelling razed. In another, kabukimono are ordered to surrender their gaudy sleeves and wear plain straps, as if humbling cloth could educate the hands it covers. The other ink is red and thicker. It marks names on lists of the executed, the exiled, the shamed. Exile sounds lenient until you remember how small a man becomes when his rice allotment and his neighbor's greetings vanish at once. For the commoner, there is little latitude. A thief who kills to keep the stolen purse is not a warrior who erred. He is pollution given feet. Akutō, the old insult, hardens into a category. When he is caught, the square fills, not only with the curious, but with the aggrieved. A shopkeeper a month behind, a widow whose boy did not return from a road the magistrates have not patrolled. The crowd's silence can be a louder thing than jeers. There is an impulse in any group to grind wrong into pace with the heels of many shoes. The law prefers a single sword to do it, tidily. Still, when the blade bites, the breath that goes out of the crowd is a kind of civic exhale. Religion runs alongside the road like a canal, sometimes full, sometimes a line of damp. The sutras do not change. All killing is a breach. Karma is a ledger you cannot bribe. The difference now is that people have time to consider them between alarms. A man who has killed not for a lord, but for himself, visits a temple in disguise and lights 3 sticks of incense, one for the victim, one for the magistrate who will someday write his name, one for his own hands that cannot be scrubbed clean. He asks a priest for a metsai ritual, the ceremony that promises to grind down the sharpest sins. The priest quotes a donation amount, and the man pays with a ring he has not yet admitted to himself he stole In the old stories, this man would shave his head and spend the rest of his life digging graves. In the new records, he returns home and sleeps badly. Redemption is rarer than we wish, even in ages that admire it. Shinto speaks more bluntly. Blood is kegar defilement. The shrine brooms sweep with a changed posture after an execution, and the ropes are retwined with sacred paper like fresh bandages on an old wound. Villagers avoid that corner for a week, not because ghosts are guaranteed, but because cleanliness has a habit of starting in the feet and climbing. You may call that superstition, you may call it public health. Either way, it keeps people gentle for a few days. Ghosts are the city's other magistrates. They judge in stories where bureaucracy cannot reach. Rashōmon's Oni is not a named outlaw brought to account. It is what happens when bodies pile up without rights and grief has nowhere to sit. In another tale, an old bandit meets a holy man on a mountain path and is shown with the merciless tenderness of saints, the lacework of souls clinging to his coat. He puts the sword down and takes up a shovel. Did that happen? The records are shy. The story is thorough. People who hear it do not stop locking their doors, but they do walk a little slower past temple gates. It would be sweet to say that peace cures cruelty. It does not. What peace does is put cruelty's hand where more people can see it and then argue about it. A ronin cuts at random in a capital that has not sung this kind of scream in a decade, and the city's pens scratch all night. A magistrate demands that offenders be displayed at major crossroads, the way fish sellers display their best catch on market mornings, as if a crowd could educate itself by looking away last. The shogunate, anxious about the civilized face it presents to its own mirror, codifies what older centuries managed with nods and favors. The book Shohato tells samurai how to behave. Other edicts tell everyone else how not to die. Punishment's theater produces its own critics. A scholar in the book district writes a quiet essay comparing an execution day to a festival and does not mean it kindly. A playwright in the licensed quarter uses a villain's swagger to sell more tickets and is later told by a discreet official to set his next tale in the far past. The present is too close to the bone. Children play magistrate in alleys, drawn lots to see who must be tied to a post and who, giggling, pretends to be a headman with a wooden sword. Their mothers scold and then fall silent because some games teach as well as harm. Not everyone condemned is nameless. A samurai retainer, his lord embarrassed by the attention his blade has paid to strangers, finds that the status does not always buy a different robe. It buys a cleaner cut. Perhaps it buys a quiet gate at dawn and an unpublicized burial. But even in a tranquil age, an example is sometimes needed from above. The notice avoids the word tsujigiri and chooses another insane. It is the same comfortable fiction we recognize. Now monsters are rare and do not wear our clothes, but the city remembers. Shops closed early that week. An old woman learned the trick of stepping into a doorway and letting danger pass. What, then, of motive, now that chroniclers have ink to spare greed remains? Grudges still count. Boredom is named with more distaste, 'cause peace breeds it. There are notes in certain officials' journals, private, never meant for a display, wondering whether some men kill. For the same reason boys throw stones at crows to feel the world answer. They are not theories, they are sighs. Psychology will arrive later with books and diagrams. In this age, The explanation that travels fastest is still the oldest one evil. Akugyo, writes a monk in a margin, and dots the final stroke too hard. We end this evening where we began, in a square, just waking. The placard stands, the warning crisp, the brushwork tidy, a delivery boy squints, lips moving as he makes out the characters. A samurai on his way to the office he pretends not to resent, does not slow his horse. A woman lays a cabbage on her stall, glances up, and crosses herself in the local way, a touch to brow and heart, which is to say she remembers how many throats the city asks all of us to guard. The law has been applied, and while it cannot make the world kinder, it can remind the world that there are borders still, and that crossing them without a standard in your hand carries a price even in the quiet centuries. Peace has a habit of collecting knives and putting them behind glass. Walk, for a moment, beneath the maple red awnings of Nihonbashi on a mild Edo afternoon. The war drums have long gone quiet. Rice flows, taxes flow, gossip flows. At a bookstall, the sheets are ink-wet, still slim novels with stormy covers, yellow-backed chapbooks, theater bills with the swaggering calligraphy. What sells best, after love and laughter, are old crimes retold. The city at peace is a city with time to remember, and memory prefers stories with teeth. The names you have met on the road begin to change their clothes. Hakamadare, who once sprang from a feigned corpse and cut down the curious, acquires a stage entrance and an exit line. In a no mask, he is a shadow that glides. In kabuki, he is all elbows and insolence, a trickster whom the hero defeats with elegance. Fujiwara no Yasumasa, the fluting noble who wouldn't be frightened, steps from chronicle to the spotlight, and, with a serene scale, tames the bandit again and again, for audiences who know the ending yet still lean forward. Rashōmon's gate, once a place where hair was stripped from the unburied, becomes a gate between worlds where an oni can be defeated with a clean stroke and a moral. Edo censors insist that today's scandals wear yesterday's robes. Playwrights oblige with a smile. If a killer ran amok last month along the southern moat, the script sets the scene long ago in the capital of peace and alters 3 syllables in the villain's name. The audience understands the disguise as readily as a neighbor's voice heard through a paper wall. When the final pose freezes, sword raised, sleeves flared, people clap for justice restored in fiction, and leave the theater grateful that the law, or at least an actor, still knows how to cut through. Woodblock artists learn the same sleight of hand. A print of a moonlit road shows a lone traveler, a half-seen blade, a gust tugging at sleeves. The caption insists this is an episode from former times, but the brushstroke remembers last winter's panic in a street 2 wards over. Other sheets turn from the human to the didactic hell scrolls where murderers boil, strung with labels that leave no doubt about who deserved what. Jigoku Zoshi hangs on the temple wall like a mirror warmed by incense. Children stare and do not sleep badly, not because they are unafraid, but because fear has been given a picture frame. Not every figure receives rehabilitation. Lake Biwa's water keeps its legend on certain nights. If you drift near Kadada, people say you can hear chanting under the oars, syllables stretched thin as reed stems. Hyo, the boatman, does not become a charming rogue. The stage leaves him on the shore. The tale insists He shaved his head and sought a prayer strong enough to carry the weight of 16 lives plus one father. The memory declines to forgive. At best, it sighs. Other killers fare better in the retellings not absolved, exactly, but turned into instruments for fear that entertains, then educates. A sword test turned a sermon, a midnight road that warns you to walk with a company. Between page and stage, the government writes in prose. Edicts forbid what the chronicles have sighed over. Crossroads testing, street corner bravado, the cutting of sleeves into banners of defiance. Samurai are reminded that valor has an hour and an address. Citizens are told they may sleep without listening for practice strikes. The great house laws for warriors are read aloud like weather. Later, penal codes stiffen the spine of the city's courts. Magistrates memorize punishment scales the way monks memorize sutras. Arrest squads learn their routes. Constables keep lists of bad houses. Informers okapiki with straw hats and sharp ears lean against door frames and pretend to be tired. The crackdown works not because men wake better, but because habit changes shape. Tsujigiri, so flamboyantly ungovernable in the rough centuries, finds itself cornered by dawn, and then by noon, and then by 7 different seals in a clerk's drawer. There are still murders. Of course, love, debt, stupidity, rage do not read proclamations, but the sport of slashing the unarmed falls out of fashion when the price is certain and swift. The spectacle moves from crossroads to courthouse, and the heads that once decorated palisades as warnings against invasion take up their final posts above prison gates as warnings against boredom. The people do not leave it all to officials. Memory becomes a local craft. Travel guides, those light little books that tell you which tea stall is worth your coins and which temple bell sounds like rain, begin to footnote the landscape with remorse. Here, a line will say, a swordsman once tested his steel. Note the stone with grooves. Beside a bridge, this jizo was raised after a child's death. Leave a sweet if you pass at dusk. A village adopts an annual rite, a lantern floated for those who never came home. A recitation of names cut down to initials and then to silence, because grief eventually chooses to unspool rather than not. Religion, too, edits and expands. Priests who once scolded in general terms learn to counsel in particulars. A penitent killer is told to copy 1,000 sutras, not for his own salvation, which is an account the temple can only advise, but because the labor may throw a rope to the widows his handmaid. Shrines collect swords as offerings. A father grips his son's wrist a little too hard outside a gate and says, "No hero is made by cutting shadows," and the boy nods because the phrase fits the mouth like a proverb. Curiosity never goes away. It civilizes. Edo discovers a form of reading that feels like eavesdropping long, moody novels where bad men meet good deaths, and the narrator pauses to explain how greed and weather conspired at a certain corner. Yomihon tell you that the killer wept. Kibyōshi sketches put a wisecrack in the margin. Traveling storytellers tap their fans and make the air itself lean in. The old accounts gain footnotes, a kitchen smell, a dog that barked, the precise number of steps between sake shop and shrine. To tell the story more tenderly is not to excuse it. It is to remind an audience that evil is not a costume, but a posture anyone can accidentally rehearse. And then there are ghosts again, not as law, but as etiquette. Households set out water on certain nights for the thirsty dead. Mothers tell children to greet crossroads respectfully. When a man arrests his hand at the last second and does not strike, he will sometimes say, half joke, half truth, that someone touched his sleeve. The sleeve touchers do not file reports. They are part of the way a city, having survived its fever, decides not to catch it again. Across all of these, you can hear another conversation, not so much between eras as between instincts. One voice wants order and prints it. Another wants meaning and performs it. The first nails up placards and counts arrests. The second raises curtains and counts heartbeats. Between them, the landscape of memory is drawn a hella scroll here. A case file there, a roadside stone with an inscription that omits the ugliest word and trusts the passerby to supply it. If you pick up one thread and follow it through the centuries, it is the thread of transformation. The naked bandit who played dead on a Heian road becomes a cautionary smile in a woodblock print. The Ronin who believed 1,000 deaths could make him invincible becomes a paragraph in a code that says death will never again be a hobby. The boatman who murdered monks becomes, uncomfortably, a parable about how repentance may save a soul and still not restore a lake to silence. Peace does not unwrite what came before. It italicizes it, adds a margin, offers a stage. Tonight we have walked from ditch to page to stage and back again, past heads on gates and paper lanterns on canals, through edicts and applause, the killers, the enforcers, the chroniclers, the actors each tried in their way to explain the same shiver along the spine of a people who prized order and could never quite keep it. In our last watch of the night, we'll gather the loose ends, law and legend, terror and lullaby, and lay them down together to see what they say about the humans who carried swords and the humans who carried stories about them. If you have walked this far with me, you have crossed more than roads. You have stepped through the gate where corpses once lay and into the courts where laws learned to speak. You have sat in cellars with travelers nursing a single candle and climbed into galleries where actors teach the same lesson with brighter paint. What remains at the end of this long corridor of centuries is not a list of monsters, but a mirror. When people say medieval Japan, they often mean a polished helmet and a poem. Both are true. So are the knife in the ditch, the forged pass, the boatman's quiet oars. It is the combination that refuses to tidy itself away. Look again at how killing was counted. In war, a head presented cleanly was currency. At the crossroads, the same head was pollution. The difference is not biology, it is permission, and the story told afterwards. That story is how a society keeps its shape. The Heian court wrote warnings into parables: do not dismount to examine a convenient corpse. The living are trickier than the dead. Kamakura wrote in iron, codifying punishments, building a ladder of penalties and calling it order. Muromachi, harried by 100 little wars, showed how a code can fray without breaking, how even a lord who borrows bandits for a season must eventually pretend not to know their names. Edo, at last, gave the final flourish. The sword retired to the rack. The statue took its bow, and theater absorbed the rest, converting raw fear into a lesson trimmed with applause. If there is a thread between Hakamadare's feigned death, the Ronin counting toward a grotesque number, and the pirate who discovered that profit could drown a town, It is not merely cruelty. It is the temptation to treat strangers as ideas, practice, treasure, tally. The answer that emerges slowly, unevenly, imperfectly is to insist on the person. Even in disguise, samurai codes stiffen toward this insistence. When peace arrives, no more cutting the unarmed for practice. A blade raised at night is not a skill, but treason against the quiet of neighbors. Temples and shrines, for their part, answer with labors that refuse abstraction. Copy this sutra. Dig this grave. Wash the stone where a name used to be. The work is small. The attention is the point. You may ask why these old horrors calm us rather than wake us. Partly because we have rehearsed them into stories we can hold without spilling, but partly because they are honest about what they cannot fix. The Ningyo Joruri puppet that strides bravely across the stage cannot return a single monk to the Lake Biwa dawn. The magistrate's swift sentence does not build a bridge where terror broke. The hell scroll terrifies, yes, but also consoles. There is a shape to consequence, a place for wickedness to go, even if the place exists only in pigment and faith. To fall asleep to such things is not to trivialize them. It is to let them finish their sentences so they do not keep rattling doors in your head. There is, too, the quiet radicalism of the witness who says little, the passerby who refused to dismount, the clerk who misfiled a warrant, the gendarme who took an extra 30 seconds at a stop, the father who said, "No hero is made by cutting shadows." None of these people will have their names in chronicles. But if you look at how violence finally receded from the crossroads, you see the path is made of such small refusals. Peace does not arrive with a single banner. It arrives with 1,000 cautious hands deciding, tonight, not to let fear perform. We spoke of religion without sermon, but it may be time to name its shape karma as arithmetic of empathy. Kill, and you accrue a debt you cannot pay with coin. Repent, and you do not erase the line, but you can teach your hands a different habit. That teaching is practical. In a village near Kai, a murderer becomes a gravedigger in the story because the grim logic feels right. If you have taken, you must learn to lay to rest. Whether the tale is fact hardly matters. It is instruction in the grammar of repair. And what of the line, always so bright in textbooks, between serial killer and soldier, between bandit and retainer? History in the courtroom likes clean categories. History at night admits what day avoids a role can slip. A title can curdle, a virtue can be borrowed for an hour to excuse a sin. That is why Edo insists on the spectacle. In the service of law, the head above the gate must be seen not as a trophy but as a warning. The execution must restore proportion rather than compete with the criminal's theater. The state, chastened by centuries of improvisation, becomes a patient director of endings. Even so, memory keeps a space for ambiguity. Hakamadare, condemned in one register, becomes a mask you can fear and admire in another. Yasumasa's flute is not only courage, it is a portrait of the citizen you want to be when the knife comes steady, unwilling to surrender composure to violence. Hio's monastery massacre refuses revision. The water will not authorize charm. These choices tell you how communities select their exemplars. Grace under threat is passed down. Cruelty that embarrasses even its beneficiaries is left to the mud. You can learn a polity's soul by who gets a stage entrance and who is left to haunt. If you are listening closely, you might hear modern echoes, we still argue about permission and context, about which violence belongs to the story we tell about ourselves and which must be named plainly and refused. We still metabolize terror into narrative so we can sleep, then awaken with rules we hope we'll keep. We still pin ribbons to roadside poles and light candles at bridges and borrow the grammar of temples when courts feel insufficient. We still, at our best, teach the young that courage is a kind of composure rather than a rehearsal for harm. What, then, does this long walk offer you now that your eyes are heavy and the room has adopted the hush of late away to tuck the knives behind glass without pretending they never hung at belts? A permission to say that a culture of poems can also breed predators, and that the poems remain true, and so does the danger. A slow, durable comfort people in other centuries faced shadows with very few tools: stories, laws, rituals, and neighbor's hand, and those were enough, eventually, to change the shape of the night. Hello and good evening. We said it at the start, promising a gentle journey past hard scenes. We kept the pace soft because the subject was not. Before we close the shutters, let us leave a few lanterns lit, one at Rashōmon's gate, not for demons, but for memory. One at the lake shore, for those who never reached the monastery, and for a father who thought a single life might pay the bill for many. One at a crossroads where a blade once tested itself and was told, finally, to be still. When you wake, the rules will be ordinary again: do not harm, look twice at easy stories, bring water for the thirsty dead, cut bread, not strangers. History does not tuck us in, but it can teach us what to do with our hands when fear suggests rehearsals we must refuse. If you have found a steadier breath somewhere along this road, keep it. The past has given you permission to rest without forgetting. Good night. Then, under a sky that keeps its own counsel, above roads that men once claimed with a steel and that now belong to feet and carts and laughter again. May your dreams keep the distance that waking must sometimes cross, and may the old tales stand their watch at the edge of sleep, where stories are gatekeepers and the city of night remembers to be kind